Missouri, summer of 1870. The night air hung heavy and still, carrying the scent of grass and gunpowder. Adeline Harper ran through the darkness, her bare feet tearing against sharp rocks and twigs. The wound in her side burned with each desperate stride, blood soaking through her torn dress. Behind her, the shouts of men echoed through the trees, accompanied by the crack of gunfire. 3 of them. 3 hunters pursuing one wounded woman through the Missouri wilderness. Adeline's breath came in ragged gasps as she pushed herself forward, one hand pressed against the knife wound in her hip. She had been running for hours, ever since she'd escaped from Renard Maxwell's camp. The man they called Scarface. The voices grew closer. Adeline slowed, her legs trembling with exhaustion. She couldn't outrun them. Not like this. Not with the blood leaving a trail behind her. She pressed her back against the rough bark of an ancient oak, sliding down into the shadows of its massive roots. Her fingers found the handle of the hunting knife she'd stolen during her escape, the same knife that had left one of Maxwell's men bleeding out in his tent. The memory made her stomach turn, but she tightened her grip. She would not be taken again. The first man approached, his steps slow and cautious. Moonlight glinted off his revolver as he stalked through the trees. He was young, too young to understand what kind of man he was working for. "I know you're here, woman," he called, voice betraying his nervousness. "Might as well come out. Maxwell wants you alive, but he didn't say nothing about not hurting you some more." Adeline remained still, controlling her breathing despite the fire in her lungs. The man moved closer, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. When he turned his back to scan the trees ahead, she made her move. She lunged from her hiding place, clamping one hand over his mouth while the other drove the knife deep into his throat. His body stiffened, then went limp as warm blood cascaded over her fingers. She lowered him to the ground, taking his revolver before melting back into the shadows. "Henry, you find something?" Another voice called from further back. A gunshot cracked through the night. Splinters of bark exploded near Adeline's head. She dropped to the ground and rolled, pain shooting through her side as the wound tore further open. She fired back blindly, the revolver bucking in her hand. "She's here! I found her!" the man shouted, firing again. Adeline ran, no longer concerned with stealth. The pain in her side had become a constant scream, but she pushed it away. She had survived worse. She would survive this too. She had to, for Hannah. She burst from the tree line into open meadow, moonlight bathing the landscape in silver. A mistake. A bullet whizzed past her ear, then another tore through the fabric of her sleeve, grazing her shoulder. She staggered but kept moving, the tall grass whipping against her legs. Dawn found Adeline half-conscious, her strength finally giving out. Through blurred vision, she saw the silhouette of a fence line rising from the morning mist. A ranch, maybe people. Help. She dragged herself forward on hands and knees, blood dripping from her reopened wound, leaving dark spots on the dew-covered grass. Each movement was agony, but she forced herself onward. The fence grew closer, a promise of salvation. Then darkness claimed her, and Adeline Harper collapsed face down in the tall grass, the buzzing of insects the last sound to reach her ears. Solomon Pierce was checking the south fence line when he spotted the vultures. The birds circled lazily in the clear morning sky, their black wings spread wide against the blue. Usually they gathered over a dead calf or deer, but something about their pattern troubled him. He pulled on the reins, guiding his chestnut mare toward the gathering. At 42, Solomon still sat tall in the saddle, his frame lean but strong from years of ranch work. His dark brown beard was neatly trimmed, with just a few strands of silver threading through it at the chin, not from age so much as the weight of memories that had aged him beyond his years. Behind wire-rimmed spectacles, his blue eyes remained sharp and observant, though the fine lines at their corners spoke of a man who had witnessed more suffering than most. As he approached the circling birds, he expected to find a fallen animal. Instead, the sight that greeted him sent a jolt through his body. A woman lay face down in the tall grass, her dark hair tangled with burrs and twigs, her dress torn and stained with blood. For a moment he thought she was dead, but then he saw the slight rise and fall of her back. Solomon dismounted quickly, his movements precise and practiced. He knelt beside her, gently turning her over. Her face was streaked with dirt and blood, her lips cracked from dehydration. A deep wound in her side had soaked her dress with crimson. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he asked, pressing fingers to her neck to find a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing dark irises filled with fear and pain. She tried to move away from him, one hand instinctively reaching for something at her side that wasn't there. "Easy now," Solomon said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her cracked lips parted. "Open it, now," she whispered, her fingers pointing to the wound at her side. "Open it up." Now, Solomon nodded, understanding immediately. The wound needed cleaning and stitching. He carefully tore the fabric around the injury to examine it. A knife wound, deep but clean. Not fatal if treated properly. "I need to get you somewhere safe," he said, reaching for his canteen. He poured a small amount of water over the wound to clear away some of the blood and dirt, causing the woman to arch in pain. Then he held the canteen to her lips. Small sips now. As she drank, he surveyed the area. The grass was flattened in a trail leading back toward the woods. She had crawled here. And from the state of her feet, she had been running barefoot for miles before that. Running from what? Or whom? Solomon looked more carefully at the ground around them. Multiple sets of boot prints in the soft earth, not far away. Men had been pursuing her. Recently. He turned his attention back to the woman. Her eyes had closed again, but her breathing remained steady. She needed immediate medical attention. With practiced care, Solomon lifted her into his arms. She was light, too light, and her skin burned with fever. He placed her gently across his saddle before mounting behind her, one arm holding her secure against his chest. "Hold on, ma'am," he murmured, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "I've got you now." The ride back to his cabin was tense, every jolt causing the woman to moan softly in pain. Solomon kept his eyes scanning the horizon, alert for any sign of the men who had been pursuing her. But the prairie stretched empty in all directions, the tall grass waving peacefully in the morning breeze. His cabin came into view, a sturdy structure of hewn logs with a stone chimney nestled against a small rise that provided shelter from the winter winds. A humble place, but it had been his sanctuary for 7 years since returning from the war, since leaving medicine behind. Or so he had thought. Solomon carried the unconscious woman inside, laying her gently on his bed. The cabin was simple but meticulously clean. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with medical texts and journals. A wooden cabinet stood in one corner, its doors closed but not locked. He worked quickly, gathering what he needed from the cabinet. Clean bandages, needle and thread, a bottle of whiskey, and a worn leather case that contained surgical instruments. His fingers lingered momentarily on the case before opening it to reveal gleaming silver tools, perfectly maintained despite years of disuse. The woman stirred as he began cutting away the fabric around her wound. "I was a doctor," he explained quietly, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "During the war, I can help you, but this is going to hurt." Working methodically, Solomon cleaned the wound with whiskey and water. The woman's face contorted in pain, but she didn't cry out. Looking more closely, he noticed older scars on her body, evidence of previous violence. This was not the first time she had suffered. As he prepared to stitch the wound, a single word escaped her lips. "Hannah." Solomon paused, needle in hand. "Hannah? Is that your name?" But the woman had slipped back into unconsciousness, her face relaxing slightly as the pain ebbed. Solomon continued his work, stitching the wound with the precise, even sutures of a skilled surgeon. His hands moved with confidence, remembering the motions they had performed thousands of times on battlefields and in field hospitals. When he finished, he bandaged the wound, then gently cleaned the dirt from her face and hands. She was younger than he had initially thought, perhaps in her late 20s, with delicate features and olive skin that suggested mixed heritage. Partly Native American, he guessed, perhaps Cherokee or Chickasaw. Night had fallen by the time Solomon completed his work. He covered the woman with a clean blanket and moved to sit in the chair by the window. Outside, a full moon cast silver light across the prairie, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Solomon opened a worn leather journal and dipped his pen in ink. For a moment, he stared at the blank page, then began to write. "Today I held a scalpel again. It has been 7 years since Shiloh, 7 years since I swore never to practice medicine again. Yet my hands remembered their purpose. I wonder if this is God's idea of a joke. continually placing lives in the hands of a man who has seen too much death. The woman will live, I think. But what brought her here, bleeding and hunted? And who is Hannah? Another soul I could not save, or someone this woman is desperate to return to? I suppose I will learn when she wakes, if she chooses to tell me. Solomon closed the journal and looked at the sleeping woman. In the soft glow of the oil lamp, with the blood and dirt washed away, she looked peaceful. But he had seen the fear in her eyes when she first awakened, and he recognized it all too well. It was the look of someone hunted, someone who had seen horrors and survived them, only to find more waiting. He had seen that same look in the mirror every day after Elizabeth died. He settled deeper into his chair for the night watch, his revolver within easy reach. Whatever or whoever had been pursuing this woman might still be out there, and Solomon Pierce had not survived the war, only to die in his own home. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering through the grass like distant voices. But the cabin remained quiet, save for the soft, steady breathing of the wounded woman and the occasional creak of Solomon's chair as he maintained his vigil through the long night. The memories came to Solomon as they always did, vivid and merciless. The stench of gangrene and gunpowder, the screams of men begging for water, for morphine, for their mothers, the constant, desperate rhythm of triage, those who would live without help, those who would die despite it, and those precious few who might be saved by his hands. Shiloh, the bloodiest battle he had witnessed. 2 days that stretched into eternity as he worked without sleep, his arms coated to the elbows in blood, performing amputations by lamplight as artillery fire shook the field hospital. And then Elizabeth, his wife, a volunteer nurse, moving among the wounded with quiet efficiency, her face pale but determined beneath her blood-spattered cap. The way she had looked at him across the crowded tent, a brief moment of connection amid the chaos. The memory fractured, as it always did, into the horror that followed. The Confederate raid on the hospital, the shooting, the fire, the screams of men trapped in their beds as flames consumed the tent. Elizabeth lying motionless among the dead. Solomon jerked awake, his heart pounding. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the cabin floor. He had not meant to doze off. Rubbing his eyes beneath his spectacles, he glanced toward the bed where the woman lay. She was awake, watching him with dark, wary eyes. "You were dreaming," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "War dreams." Solomon straightened in his chair, composing himself. "Yes," he admitted. "They never quite leave you." She nodded slightly, understanding in her gaze. "Water?" she asked. He rose and filled a cup from the pitcher on his desk, then helped her sit up enough to drink. She winced as the movement pulled at her stitches, but managed a few sips before leaning back against the pillow. "Thank you," she said. "For this and for—" She gestured vaguely toward her bandaged side. "You're welcome." Solomon set the cup within her reach. "I'm Solomon Pierce." She hesitated, clearly weighing whether to give her real name. "Adeline," she finally said. "Adeline Harper." "Well, Mrs. Harper, that wound was deep, but clean. You are lucky it didn't hit anything vital." "Not Mrs.," she corrected him. "Just Adeline." Solomon nodded, acknowledging the correction without pressing for details. "You should rest, Adeline. Whatever you're running from, you're safe here for now." A bitter smile touched her lips. No one is ever truly safe to Pierce. "Just Solomon," he countered, echoing her correction. "I haven't been a doctor for a long time." "Your hands say otherwise," Adeline observed, glancing at his fingers. "They're a surgeon's hands. Precise. Steady. You don't forget that skill." Solomon looked down at his hands. The long fingers, the small scars, the calluses that had formed from years of ranch work but hadn't quite erased the older patterns of his previous life. "No," he agreed quietly. "You don't forget." A silence fell between them, filled with unasked questions. Solomon broke it first. "Before you fell unconscious, you mentioned a name. Hannah. Is she someone I can help you find?" Adeline's face changed, a flash of both pain and fierce protectiveness crossing her features. "My daughter," she said after a moment. "She's 6. She's away. Safe, I hope." Her voice caught on the last word, betraying her uncertainty. Solomon nodded, understanding the fear in her voice. "The men who were following you, they work for a man called Reynard Maxwell," Adeline said, her expression hardening. though most know him as Scarface. He wants something I have, something I've hidden. And your daughter, is she? She's with people I trust, or was, when I last saw her. Adeline's voice was tight with contained emotion. I need to find her, to make sure she's still safe. You need to heal first, Solomon said gently. You've lost a lot of blood, and that wound will take time to mend. Hannah needs you alive and well. Adeline closed her eyes briefly, a battle playing out across her face, the desperate need to find her daughter warring with the reality of her physical condition. Finally, she nodded. A few days, she conceded. No more. We'll see how you heal, Solomon replied, his tone making it clear this wasn't negotiable. I've seen too many people die from pushing themselves too hard after an injury. Adeline studied him as if taking his measure. In the war? Yes, he said simply. I was a field surgeon with the Union Army, 3rd Division. She nodded slowly. You have nightmares about it. It wasn't a question, but Solomon answered anyway. Yes, less often than before, but they never truly leave you. The mind remembers what the hands have done. A look of understanding passed between them, the recognition of shared trauma, though from different sources. Then Adeline's eyes grew heavy, the brief conversation having exhausted her limited strength. Rest, Solomon told her, rising from his chair. I'll check your bandages in the morning. He moved toward the door, intending to sleep in the chair on the porch, but Adeline's voice stopped him. Doctor, she said, the title slipping out despite his earlier correction. Thank you. Not everyone would have helped a stranger bleeding in their field. Solomon paused in the doorway. Get some sleep, Adeline, he said softly. You're safe tonight. As he settled into the chair on the porch, rifle across his lap, Solomon knew he might have just lied to her. If these men, this Renard Maxwell, were still searching for her, they could appear at any time. The vast emptiness of the prairie, usually a comfort to Solomon, suddenly seemed ominous, filled with potential threats hidden beyond the reach of his sight. He checked the rifle's loading, then leaned back, his eyes scanning the moonlit landscape. The night stretched long before him, filled with the chorus of insects and the occasional call of a hunting owl. Solomon remained vigilant, a solitary sentinel against whatever ghosts, real or remembered, might emerge from the darkness. 3 days passed, marked by the slow rhythm of Adeline's recovery and the quiet routines of Solomon's ranch life. Each morning he changed her bandages, noting with professional satisfaction that the wound showed no signs of infection. Each evening he prepared simple meals, which they ate mostly in silence, the gap between them filled with unasked questions. On the 4th night, Solomon was awakened from his makeshift bed on the porch by sounds from inside the cabin. At first he thought Adeline might be in pain, but as he listened more carefully, he recognized the familiar cadence of nightmare terror. He entered quietly, finding her thrashing weakly against the sheets, her face contorted in fear, words spilling from her lips in desperate whispers. No. Hannah, run. Maxwell, please. Solomon approached cautiously, knowing better than to startle someone trapped in a nightmare. Adeline, he called softly. Adeline, wake up. You're dreaming. Her eyes flew open, wild with fear, one hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. When she recognized Solomon, she sagged back against the pillow, breathing hard. Water, he offered, and she nodded gratefully. As she drank, Solomon noted the sheen of sweat on her brow. Fever's broken, he observed. That's good. The wound is healing well. Adeline nodded, her breathing slowly returning to normal. I was back there, she said after a moment, in his camp. I could feel the ropes cutting into my wrists. Solomon sat in the chair beside the bed, giving her space but offering his presence. Maxwell's camp? He asked quietly. Adeline nodded, her gaze distant. He kept me there for weeks, trying to make me tell him where I'd hidden it. Her hand unconsciously moved to a chain around her neck, though whatever had hung from it was gone. Where I'd hidden Hannah. Solomon waited, sensing she needed to speak but not wanting to push. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. Finally, Adeline continued, You have nightmares about the war. I have nightmares about Reynard Maxwell. She looked directly at Solomon. He killed my husband, in front of me, because Joshua wouldn't sell our land. Solomon felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. I'm sorry, he said, the words inadequate but sincere. Joshua found something on our property, Adeline continued, her voice taking on a detached quality, as if she were reciting facts about strangers rather than her own tragedy. A cave with markings inside, old Cherokee markings. He believed they led to a gold deposit, a massive one, forgotten for generations. He made a map, had it engraved on a silver medallion. She touched her neck again, where the medallion should have been. Somehow Maxwell heard rumors. He came with his men, offering to buy our land. When Joshua refused, her voice faltered, then steadied. When he refused, Maxwell shot him. Then he took me, thinking I knew where the medallion was. But I'd already given it to Hannah and sent her away. And that's why you're running, Solomon concluded quietly, to find Hannah before Maxwell does. Adeline nodded, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. I escaped 3 nights ago. Killed one of his men in the process. She looked down at her hands as if still seeing blood on them. I'm not proud of that, but I'd do it again. I need to find my daughter. Solomon was silent for a long moment, processing her story. The woman before him had endured horrors, yet still found the strength to fight, to escape, to survive, all for the love of her child. Where is Hannah now? He asked. A mission near the Kansas border, run by Cherokee friends. Adeline's eyes filled with doubt. At least that's where she was when I was captured. If Maxwell found out, we'll find her, Solomon said, the words surprising him as much as they seemed to surprise Adeline. When you're strong enough, we'll find Hannah. Adeline studied him, suspicion warring with desperate hope. Why would you help me? You don't know me. This isn't your fight. Solomon looked away, his gaze falling on the leather journal on his desk. Maybe I'm tired of not fighting, he said quietly, of hiding out here, tending cattle and fences, while the world goes on without me. He stood, moving toward the window to look out at the star-filled sky. I couldn't save my wife during the war. Couldn't save my brother. Couldn't save most of the men who came under my knife. He turned back to Adeline, a resolve in his eyes that had been dormant for years. But maybe I can help you find your daughter. Adeline's expression softened slightly. You don't know what kind of man Maxwell is, she warned. He's dangerous, ruthless. I've seen dangerous men before, Solomon replied, a shadow passing across his face. I've become quite familiar with the depths of human cruelty. Something in his tone made Adeline study him more carefully. There's more to your story than just being a war doctor, isn't there? Solomon hesitated, then moved to his desk, opening the drawer to remove a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age and stained at one corner with what might have been blood. He handed it to Adeline without a word. She unfolded it carefully. It was a letter written in an elegant, flowing hand. Dr. Pierce, you saved my life at Shiloh, but left me this gift upon my face. I understand your purpose all too well. One day I shall return your favor, and you will learn what it means to live with a mark that cannot be erased. R.M. Adeline's eyes widened as she read the initials. She looked up at Solomon, new understanding dawning in her expression. Renard Maxwell, she whispered. You know him. Solomon nodded, taking back the letter and carefully refolding it. During the Battle of Shiloh, a Confederate officer was brought to my field hospital with severe facial wounds. I operated on him, saved his life. His voice grew distant, as if he were seeing it all again. But I recognized him. He had led the raid on another field hospital weeks earlier, the raid that killed my wife and dozens of wounded men. Solomon's hands tightened on the letter. So I did what no doctor should ever do. I deliberately left him scarred, made sure the wound would heal in a way that would mark him forever. He looked up at Adeline, a mix of shame and defiance in his eyes. I violated my oath as a physician, but I wanted him to see what he'd done every time he looked in a mirror. That's why they call him Scarface, Adeline said softly. Solomon nodded. After the war, I learned he had become a bounty hunter, then something worse. I've been waiting for him to find me ever since. Seems fate has brought us together after all. Just not in the way either of us expected. Adeline was silent for a long moment, absorbing this new information. So this isn't just about helping me, she finally said. It's about facing your own ghost. Perhaps, Solomon admitted, but does that change anything? You need help finding your daughter. I'm offering that help. Adeline shook her head slowly. No, it doesn't change anything, except, she met his gaze directly. Except that now I understand why your nightmares are so vivid. We're both haunted by the same man. Solomon returned the letter to the drawer. Try to get some more sleep, he said. You'll need your strength in the days ahead. As he turned to leave, Adeline's voice stopped him again. Solomon, she said, using his given name for the first time. Thank you for telling me the truth. He nodded once, then stepped out onto the porch, closing the door softly behind him. The night air was cool against his face, carrying the scent of grass and distant rain. Solomon took a deep breath, feeling as if something long frozen inside him had begun to thaw. For 7 years, he had been waiting for Renard Maxwell to find him, to exact whatever revenge the man had planned. Now, through some twist of fate or divine intervention, Maxwell's path had crossed his once again. Not directly, but through this wounded woman with fierce eyes and a desperate mission. Solomon settled into his chair, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. For the first time in years, he felt something besides grief or resignation. Purpose, perhaps, or the awakening of a part of himself he had thought long dead. The part that had once taken an oath to heal, to protect, to save lives rather than hide from them. Whatever lay ahead, Solomon knew with certainty that his life of quiet isolation had ended the moment he found Adeline Harper bleeding in his field. The wheel had turned, bringing him face to face with his past, offering not just danger, but perhaps, finally, a chance for redemption. The following morning, Adeline was strong enough to sit on the porch, wrapped in one of Solomon's old shirts over her torn and blood-stained dress. She watched as he tended to the few cattle he kept, moving with the easy confidence of a man comfortable with physical labor despite his intellectual background. When he returned to the cabin at midday, he found her leafing through one of his medical journals, her brow furrowed in concentration. Interesting reading, he asked, setting down his hat and pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. I was looking for information about knife wounds, she replied, wanting to understand how long before I can travel. Solomon assessed her with a clinical eye. The wound is clean and healing well, but you've lost a lot of blood. Pushing too hard too soon could reopen it or lead to other complications. Adeline's face tightened with frustration. Every day I stay here is another day Hannah is alone. Another day Maxwell's men could find her. And if you collapse from exhaustion halfway there, what good would that do Hannah? Solomon countered, his tone gentle but firm. 3 more days of rest at minimum. Then we can discuss travel plans. Adeline noted his use of we, but didn't comment on it. Instead, she closed the journal and set it aside. I need something to do while I recover. I'm not used to sitting idle. Solomon considered this, then nodded toward his desk. There's paper and pencil in the drawer if you'd like to write or draw. Or there are more books on the shelf. Thank you, she said, then hesitated. Last night, the letter from Maxwell. May I see it again? Solomon's expression became guarded, but after a moment, he moved to the desk and retrieved the letter from its drawer. He handed it to her without comment, then busied himself preparing a simple lunch of bread and dried venison. Adeline studied the letter carefully this time, her fingers tracing the elegant script. His handwriting doesn't match the man, she observed. Too refined, too controlled. He was an officer, Solomon replied, slicing bread. Educated, from what I gathered. The worst monsters often are. Adeline nodded absently, still examining the paper. This blood stain, she said, touching the brown smear at the corner. Is it his? Solomon paused in his task. No, he said quietly. It's mine. He shot me when he delivered it. Adeline looked up sharply. He found you before. When? 2 years after the war, 1867. Solomon resumed his preparation, his movements precise but tense. I was working as a town doctor in Illinois. He came into my office late one evening, face half hidden by a hat. I didn't recognize him until he spoke. Solomon's voice took on a distant quality, as if he were seeing it all again. He said he had been looking for me for a long time, that he wanted to thank me personally for my handiwork. Then he placed that letter on my desk, drew his gun, and shot me in the shoulder. He unconsciously touched his left shoulder, where the wound had healed long ago. He could have killed me easily, but that wasn't his intention. He wanted me to live with the fear of when he might return to finish what he started. So you ran, Adeline concluded, came out here to hide. To heal, Solomon corrected, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. Both the gunshot wound and Other things, I was not in a good place after the war, after Elizabeth died. Adeline's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry, she said, about your wife, about all of it. Solomon acknowledged her words with a nod, then changed the subject. Lunch is ready. You should eat to regain your strength. They ate in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Adeline spoke again. When I was held in Maxwell's camp, I overheard things, she said. He's looking for someone, a doctor who scarred him. He's obsessed with finding him. She looked directly at Solomon. Finding you. Solomon set down his cup slowly. Did he mention me by name? No, Adeline replied, but he spoke of the doctor with the marking knife. Said he'd been hunting him for years. She hesitated. I think that's why he didn't kill me immediately when I wouldn't tell him where the medallion was. He's learned patience in his revenge. A chill ran down Solomon's spine at her words. So he's still looking for me. Yes, Adeline confirmed, and if he finds out you've helped me. She didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew what it meant. By helping Adeline, Solomon wasn't just involving himself in her troubles. He was accelerating the collision course he'd been on with Maxwell for 7 years. It doesn't change anything, Solomon said after a moment, his voice firm. You still need to find your daughter. I still intend to help you. Adeline studied him as if trying to understand his motivation. Why risk yourself for strangers? For me and Hannah. Solomon was quiet for a long moment, formulating his answer. For 7 years, I've been waiting for a confrontation I knew would come eventually. 7 years of looking over my shoulder, wondering if today would be the day Renard Maxwell found me again. He met her gaze steadily. Maybe I'm tired of waiting. Maybe helping you is a way of finally facing what I've been dreading. Or maybe, he continued more softly, I've spent too long hiding from the world, from what I was meant to do. I took an oath once to help those in need. I've broken that oath in more ways than one, but perhaps it's not too late to honor it again. Adeline folded the letter and handed it back to him. You're a good man, Dr. Pierce, she said, the formality of the title deliberate this time, respectful. Better than you give yourself credit for. Solomon took the letter, his fingers brushing against hers momentarily. I'm just a man trying to find his way back, he said quietly. Same as you. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Solomon was on his feet instantly, moving to the window to peer out. A rider, he said, tension evident in his voice. Coming fast. Adeline rose quickly, wincing at the pull on her stitches. Maxwell's men? Solomon shook his head. Can't tell yet, but just one rider from what I can see. He reached for his rifle, checking that it was loaded. Stay inside. If there's trouble, there's a trap door under the rug by the fireplace. Root cellar beneath. Before Adeline could respond, Solomon was out the door, rifle in hand, moving to position himself on the porch where he had a clear view of the approaching rider, but was partially shielded by a support post. The rider slowed as he approached the cabin, raising one hand in a gesture of peace. He was a lean, weathered man in his 50s, with a gray-streaked beard and the dusty clothes of a cattle rancher. Ho there, Pierce, the man called. Don't shoot, it's just old Harlan. Solomon lowered his rifle slightly, recognizing his nearest neighbor, whose ranch lay 5 miles to the west. Harlan, he acknowledged, riding a bit fast for a social call. Harlan Whitaker dismounted, leading his lathered horse the last few yards. Ain't social, he confirmed grimly. Thought you ought to know. There's strangers asking questions in town. Looking for a woman. Native or mixed blood, they said. Injured. Solomon kept his expression neutral, but felt his pulse quicken. What kind of men? The kind that make folks cross the street, Harlan said, wiping sweat from his brow. 5 of them, led by a tall fellow with a nasty scar down one side of his face. Cold eyes, the kind that have seen too much killing and developed a taste for it. Inside the cabin, Adeline had moved to the window, keeping out of sight but listening to every word. Her face had gone pale at the description of the scarred man. They offering a reward? Solomon asked, his voice carefully casual. $50 for information, Harlan confirmed. 100 for the woman herself. He peered at Solomon curiously. You seen anyone matching that description? Solomon shook his head. Been keeping to myself as usual. Harlan nodded, seemingly satisfied. Well, thought you should know anyway. They're staying at the Wayfarers Inn in town. Said they'd be asking around for a few days. He remounted his horse. You take care now, Pierce. Those ain't the kind of men I'd want finding me alone out here. Appreciate the warning, Harlan, Solomon said, raising a hand in farewell as the older man turned his horse and rode away. When Harlan was out of sight, Solomon returned to the cabin, finding Adeline standing by the window, her face tense with fear and determination. He's found me, she said quietly. Somehow he's tracked me this far. He hasn't found you yet, Solomon corrected, setting his rifle aside, but he's looking and getting close. Adeline began gathering her few belongings, the torn dress, now clean but still blood-stained, the boots Solomon had cleaned for her. I need to leave, now, before he connects me to your ranch. Solomon caught her arm gently. Adeline, stop, think. You're still weak from blood loss. The wound could reopen if you push too hard. And where would you go? On foot, in your condition? She pulled away from him, frustration and fear making her movements sharp. I can't stay here, Day. I'm putting you in danger. And every moment I waste, Maxwell gets closer to finding Hannah. Listen to me, Solomon said, his voice firm but calm. Maxwell doesn't know you're here yet. Harlan would have said something if the men had mentioned a doctor or my ranch specifically. We still have time. For what? Adeline demanded. For you to heal enough to travel safely. For us to plan. Solomon met her gaze steadily. Running blindly will only get you caught again, or killed. Adeline's shoulders slumped slightly, the logic of his words penetrating her panic. 2 days, she conceded. No more. Solomon nodded. 2 days, and then we'll leave together before dawn on the third day. We? Adeline questioned, though there was less resistance in her voice than before. Yes, we, Solomon confirmed. I know the territory better than you. I have horses, supplies, weapons. And as we've established, Maxwell is hunting both of us, in his way. We stand a better chance together. Adeline studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, accepting his reasoning, if not entirely comfortable with it. 2 days, she repeated. Then we find Hannah. Solomon moved to his desk, pulling out a map of the territory. Show me where this mission is, he said, spreading the map before her. We'll need to plan our route carefully, avoiding the main roads and towns where Maxwell's men might be watching. As Adeline leaned over the map, pointing out the location of the Cherokee mission near the Kansas border, Solomon felt a strange mix of emotions. Fear, certainly, at the prospect of finally confronting the man who had haunted his dreams for years, but also a sense of purpose he had thought long lost. Whatever came next would be dangerous, possibly fatal. But for the first time in 7 years, he was moving forward instead of simply waiting for the past to catch up with him. Outside, dark clouds were gathering on the western horizon, promising a storm by nightfall. Solomon glanced at them briefly before returning his attention to the map and their plans. An appropriate metaphor, he thought. The calm before the storm, the gathering darkness. But perhaps, just perhaps, there might be clear skies waiting on the other side. The storm that had threatened on the horizon arrived with fury, battering the small cabin with driving rain and wind that howled through the prairie grass like a wounded animal. Lightning split the sky in jagged bursts, illuminating the room in harsh white flashes. Solomon sat at his desk, checking and rechecking the route they would take to the Cherokee mission, while Adeline rested in the bed, her eyes open, watching the storm rage beyond the window. We should leave tomorrow, she said suddenly, her voice barely audible above the thunder. The rain will wash away our tracks. Solomon looked up from the map. Your wound is healing, she interrupted, and Maxwell is getting closer. We can't wait. Solomon studied her face in the lamplight. The color had returned to her cheeks, and the fever was gone. We'll see how you're doing in the morning, and he conceded. If the wound looks good, we'll leave at first light. Thunder crashed overhead, rattling the windows. The storm matched the tension building inside the cabin, the sense of time running out, of forces beyond their control converging upon them. Tell me about Hannah, Solomon said after a moment, setting aside the map. What is she like? A softness came into Adeline's eyes that Solomon hadn't seen before. She's brave, she said. So brave. And stubborn. Gets that from both sides of her family. A faint smile touched her lips. She has dark hair like mine, but her eyes are her father's. Clear blue, like a summer skip by. She sounds like a remarkable child. She is. Adeline's hand unconsciously moved to the empty chain around her neck. The day Maxwell came, I had just enough time to give her the medallion and tell her to run to the hidden place we'd practiced, a small cave behind our cabin, then to go to the mission if I didn't come for her by nightfall. Her voice grew strained. She didn't cry, didn't hesitate, just took the medallion and ran, quiet as a shadow. 6 years old, and braver than most grown men I've known. No child should face such things, Solomon agreed quietly. But the world is rarely what it should be. Adeline turned her gaze back to the storm outside. No, it rarely is. After a moment, she looked back at him. What about you? Did you and Elizabeth have children? The question caught Solomon off guard. No, he answered, his voice careful, controlled. We had been married only a year when the war began. We had talked about children afterward. But then, I'm sorry, Adeline said softly. I shouldn't have asked. Tell me about her, she said. About Elizabeth. Solomon was silent for so long that Adeline thought he wouldn't answer. Then hesitantly he began to speak. She was a teacher before the war, he said, his gaze distant. We met in a small Illinois community. I was the town doctor, and she taught at the local school. She had this way with children. They adored her. A small, sad smile touched his lips. When the war came, I enlisted as a surgeon. Elizabeth could have stayed safely behind, but she volunteered as a nurse. Said if I was going to be in danger, she wouldn't sit at home worrying. His voice caught. The night of the raid, she was tending to the wounded in the surgical tent. Confederate forces attacked the hospital camp, a violation of the rules of war. The commander who ordered it was, he paused. It was Maxwell. Adeline's eyes widened slightly. Maxwell attacked a field hospital? Deliberately? Solomon nodded grimly. Intelligence reports later confirmed it was a calculated decision. 34 wounded soldiers died that night, along with 12 medical personnel, Elizabeth among them. Lightning flashed, illuminating the cabin in stark white light. In that instant, Adeline could see the raw grief etched into every line of Solomon's when grief and something darker. Guilt. I wasn't there, White admitted, the words heavy with self-recrimination. I'd been called to another field hospital miles away. When I returned the next morning, there was nothing left but ashes and bodies. You couldn't have known, Adeline said gently. You couldn't have prevented it. Perhaps not, Solomon conceded, but I could have honored her memory better than I did. He looked down at his hands. When Maxwell was brought to my operating table weeks later, severely wounded but alive, I recognized him from intelligence reports, and I made a choice that violated everything I had sworn to uphold as a physician. You marked him, Adeline supplied. Left him scarred. Yes. Solomon's voice was barely audible. I told myself it was justice, but really it was vengeance, and it changed nothing. Elizabeth was still gone. Silence fell between them, filled only by the sound of the rain drumming against the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. We all do things we regret when faced with unbearable loss, Adeline said finally. After Joshua was killed, She paused, gathering her courage. I wasn't entirely truthful before. About Hannah. Solomon looked up, curiosity replacing some of the grief in his expression. Hannah is my daughter in every way that matters, Adeline continued carefully. But I didn't give birth to her. I found her. 3 years ago, a white woman stumbled into our Cherokee settlement. She was heavily pregnant, exhausted, clearly running from something or someone. She gave birth that night but developed a fever afterward. Before she died, she begged me to take her baby, to keep her safe from the man with the marked face. Adeline's eyes met Solomon's. She called him Renard. Solomon's breath caught. Maxwell's child? I believe so, Adeline nodded. The woman, she said her name was Beth, only asked that I name the baby Hannah after her grandmother and keep her away from Maxwell at all costs. So you adopted her, Solomon said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Yes, Joshua and I had been trying for a child without success. It seemed like fate. Adeline's voice grew softer. We raised her as our own. No one questioned it. Mixed marriages and mixed children were common enough in the territories. Hannah was barely 3 months old when I took her. She's known no mother but me. And Maxwell never knew? I don't think so, not until recently at least. Adeline's expression darkened. When he held me captive, he sometimes spoke of a woman who had betrayed him, run away with something precious of his. I think he meant Beth, Hannah's birth mother. And now he's hunting both the gold and his own child, Solomon concluded grimly. The medallion and Hannah, yes. Adeline's eyes shone with fierce determination in the lamplight. But he'll never have either. I'll die before I let him take her. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a night washed clean. Neither of them slept much, minds racing with the revelations that had passed between them and the journey that lay ahead. Dawn found them both awake, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep but resolute. Solomon changed Adeline's bandage one final time, noting with satisfaction that the wound was healing cleanly. As the first golden rays of sunlight spilled across the prairie, they led the horses from the small barn behind the cabin. Solomon had chosen his steady chestnut mare for Adeline, while he rode a larger bay gelding with the strength and endurance for long travel. Before mounting, Solomon took one last look at the cabin that had been his sanctuary and prison for 7 years. He felt a curious lightness at leaving it behind, as if in abandoning these walls, he was also leaving behind some of the grief and guilt that had weighed him down for so long. They rode out as the sun crested fully above the horizon, heading northeast, away from town and the men who sought them. They rode steadily through the morning, keeping to less traveled paths and using the terrain for cover whenever possible. Solomon set a careful pace, aware that pushing too hard could reopen Adeline's wound. For her part, Adeline showed no sign of discomfort, though Solomon suspected her silence masked considerable pain. By midday, they stopped in a small grove of cottonwoods beside a stream to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. Adeline eased herself down from the saddle, her movements stiff but controlled. "How's the wound?" Solomon asked, helping her sit beneath the dappled shade of a tree. "Manageable," she replied, which Solomon translated to mean painful but not debilitating. He'd seen enough stoicism during the war to recognize it. "Let me check it anyway," he insisted, kneeling beside her. Adeline hesitated, then nodded, lifting the edge of her shirt just enough to reveal the bandaged area. Solomon carefully peeled back the dressing, relieved to see no fresh blood. "Still holding," he confirmed, replacing the bandage. "But we should change it tonight." While the horses drank from the stream, Solomon took out his journal and began writing. The familiar act centered him, providing a moment of normality amid their uncertain journey. Adeline watched him curiously. "You write in that every day?" Solomon nodded. "For years now. It started as a medical log during the war, became something more personal afterward." "May I?" Adeline asked, gesturing toward the journal. Surprised by her interest, Solomon hesitated, then handed her the leather-bound book. "It's nothing profound, just thoughts, memories, observations." Adeline opened the journal carefully, leafing through pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. Her eyes caught on various passages. April 12, 1868. Delivered the Taylor twins today. 2 healthy boys. First birth I've attended since establishing practice here. Life continues, even in the shadow of so much death. September 3rd, 1869. Dreams of Elizabeth again last night. In this one, she was teaching in our old schoolhouse, but all the children had the faces of men I couldn't save on the operating table. I woke shouting her name. December 25th, 1869. Christmas alone again. 5 years since Elizabeth died. The neighbors invited me to dinner, but I declined. Their pity is well-intentioned but suffocating. Worked instead on setting the broken leg of Harlan's prize bull. Better to be useful than pitied. She closed the book gently, handing it back to him. "It's a way of keeping the past from overwhelming you," she observed, containing it on the page. "Something like that," Solomon agreed, tucking the journal back into his saddlebag. "Writing helps me process things, make sense of them, or at least try to." "I never learned to write properly," Adeline admitted. "Joshua was teaching me before." "I could teach you," Solomon offered, "when all this is over." The simple statement hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement that they both hoped for an after, a time beyond the immediate danger they faced. They resumed their journey, the terrain gradually changing as they rode northeast. The open prairie gave way to more wooded areas and rolling hills, providing better cover but requiring more careful navigation. "How did you become a doctor?" Adeline asked, breaking the companionable silence. Before the war, I mean. My father was a physician in Philadelphia. I grew up watching him work, admiring how he could ease suffering with his knowledge and hands. Solomon guided his horse around a fallen tree before continuing. I went to medical school following his footsteps, then moved west to Illinois to establish my own practice. I wanted to serve communities that needed doctors more desperately than the cities back east. And then the war came, Adeline supplied. Yes, like many, I thought it would be brief. Instead, it was 4 years of hell. 4 years of watching boy barely old enough to shave die in agony, of making impossible choices about who to save and who to let go. That changes a person, Adeline said quietly. It does, Solomon agreed, but so does losing someone you love to violence. He glanced at her. We have that in common, I suppose. As the sun began its descent, Solomon spotted a suitable campsite, a small clearing sheltered by a rocky outcropping that would block their fire from view on 3 sides. After a simple meal, Solomon checked Adeline's wound again, cleaning it carefully and applying fresh bandages. Still healing well, he assured her. How's the pain? Manageable, she repeated, though the tightness around her eyes suggested otherwise. Solomon reached into his medical bag and produced a small brown bottle. Laudanum, he explained. Just a few drops to take the edge off so you can sleep. Adeline shook her head. I need to stay alert. I'll keep watch, Solomon countered. You need rest to heal. After a moment's hesitation, Adeline accepted a few drops of the bitter medicine in a cup of water. As they sat beside the fire, waiting for the drug to take effect, Solomon retrieved his journal again and began to write. What are you writing now? She asked, her voice softening as the laudanum began to work. Solomon glanced up with a small smile. Today's journey, the changing landscape, the way the light looked on the prairie after the storm. Read some to me? She requested drowsily. Surprised but touched by the request, Solomon cleared his throat and began to read. The land opened before us today like a book whose pages have been turned by wind and rain for centuries. Each hill, each stand of trees, each winding stream tells a story older than any human memory. We are merely passing characters in this ancient narrative, leaving footprints that will soon be washed away. He paused, glancing at Adeline. Her eyes were closed, but she nodded slightly, encouraging him to continue. My companion rides with remarkable strength for one so recently wounded. There is steel in her that reminds me of Elizabeth, though they could not be more different in background and circumstance. Perhaps it is simply the resilience that comes from surviving what should have broken you, a quality I have observed in many but mastered in none, least of all myself. Adeline's breathing had deepened into the rhythm of sleep. The laudanum had done its work, giving her a temporary respite from pain and fear. Solomon gently covered her with a blanket, then moved to sit with his back against the rock face, rifle across his lap, keeping watch through the night. Dawn arrived with pearlescent light that transformed dew-laden grass into fields of diamonds. Solomon, who had dozed only briefly during the night, roused Adeline gently from her laudanum-induced sleep. How do you feel? He asked as she blinked awake. Better, she admitted, stretching carefully to test her wound. The medicine helped. They ate a quick breakfast and broke camp efficiently. As Adeline prepared to mount her horse, Solomon noticed her grimace slightly. Let me help you, he offered, moving to her side. I can manage, she insisted, but the strain in her voice belied her words. I know you can, Solomon replied calmly, but there's no need to aggravate your wound unnecessarily. After a moment's hesitation, Adeline nodded, allowing Solomon to support her as she mounted the chestnut mare. His hands were strong and steady at her waist, lifting her with surprising ease. They rode at a steady pace, the landscape gradually changing as they approached the foothills that marked the border between Missouri and Kansas territory. Around midday, as they paused to rest the horses near a small spring, Solomon spotted something that made his blood run cold. A thin column of smoke rising from beyond the next ridge, perhaps 3 miles distant. Stay here, he instructed Adeline, retrieving his rifle. Keep the horses quiet. Before she could protest, he was moving up the ridge, staying low and using the scattered boulders for cover. At the crest, he lay flat against the warm stone and raised his field glass, a wartime relic he'd kept for its practical value. Through the glass, he could make out a small camp, 3 men, 4 horses. They weren't travelers or hunters. Their positioning and alertness spoke of men on patrol. Maxwell's men, almost certainly, he's searching the territory methodically. He was about to retreat when movement at the edge of his vision made him freeze. Adeline was approaching, keeping low as he had done, but visible to anyone looking in the right direction. She reached his side and flattened herself against the rock. "What do you see?" she whispered. "Three men, likely Maxwell's," Solomon replied tersely. "They appear to be breaking camp." Adeline eased forward to peer over the ridge. Her body tensed as she studied the distant figures. "The one by the fire," she said softly. "That's Davis. He was one of my guards when Maxwell held me captive." Solomon glanced at her, noting the hardness that had entered her eyes. "You're certain?" "Yes." Her voice was cold. He took particular pleasure in his work. They retreated carefully back to their horses, keeping low until the ridge concealed them fully from the distant riders. "That was too close," Solomon said once they were safely out of sight. "We need to be more cautious." As they continued their journey, now even more vigilant, Adeline spoke quietly. "You handle that rifle like a soldier, not a doctor." Solomon glanced back at her, surprised by the observation. "I learned during the war, out of necessity. Field hospitals were sometimes targeted, as I learned too well." "No," Adeline shook her head slightly. "It's more than that. The way you move, how you scan the terrain, your awareness of sight lines and cover. That's not something you pick up defending a field hospital." Solomon was silent for a long moment, weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he sighed. "Before I was assigned permanently to surgical duties, I served briefly with a sharpshooter unit. It was early in the war when the Army was desperate for men with good eyesight and steady hands." Adeline's eyes widened slightly. "You were a sniper?" "For 7 months," Solomon confirmed, his voice tight with old discomfort. "I had 28 confirmed kills before requesting transfer to medical duties." "Why the change?" Adeline asked, though her expression suggested she already sensed the answer. "Because I was good at it," Solomon said quietly. "Too good. I could detach myself, see men not as human beings but as targets, problems of distance and wind speed to be solved. It frightened me, that capacity for detachment." He urged his horse forward again. "I realized I wanted to save lives, not take them. I had medical training, so I requested transfer to the surgical corps. After initial resistance, they agreed. Good surgeons were even harder to find than good marksmen." Adeline was quiet for a time, absorbing this new information about her companion. Finally, she said, "We all have parts of ourselves we'd rather keep hidden, even from ourselves." "The skills have proven useful at times," Solomon admitted, "for hunting, if nothing else, and perhaps for keeping us both alive in the days ahead." Adeline added soberly. The implication hung between them, that Solomon's military skills might be called upon again, that more blood might stain his hands before their journey ended. As evening approached, Adeline surprised Solomon by taking his rifle and checking it methodically. "My husband taught me," she explained, noticing his expression. "He believed everyone on the frontier should know how to handle firearms properly." "Your husband was a wise man," Solomon observed. "He was." A shadow crossed Adeline's face. Joshua saw the good in people, but he wasn't naive about the dangers of frontier life. That night, as they sat by a small fire, Adeline asked suddenly, "When I was held in Maxwell's camp, I overheard things. He's looking for someone, a doctor who scarred him." Solomon's face grew grim. "He's been hunting me for years. Now he hunts you, Hannah, in the medallion too. A confluence of vengeances." "Tell me about the medallion," Solomon said. "The one with the map." Adeline's fingers moved to the empty chain around her neck. Joshua found a cave with ancient Cherokee markings, including what appeared to be a map to a gold deposit, one that had been sacred to the Cherokee generations ago. "And he had the map engraved on a medallion?" Solomon prompted. Adeline nodded. "A silversmith in town owed him a favor. The medallion shows landmarks, distances, directions, all disguised in Cherokee symbols that most white men wouldn't recognize as a map at all." "Clever," Solomon remarked. "Joshua was many things, but never a fool," Adeline agreed. "He wanted to use the gold to establish a school for Cherokee children, to preserve their language and traditions." "A noble goal," Solomon said. "One that Maxwell wouldn't share, I imagine." "No," Adeline's voice hardened. "To him, it's just wealth, power to take what he wants." According to Solomon's calculations, They should reach the Cherokee mission by late afternoon if they maintained a steady pace. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they pushed northeast, avoiding the more established paths where they might be spotted. By mid-morning, they crested a ridge that offered a view of the rolling hills ahead. Solomon paused, consulting his map. The mission should be about 5 miles northeast, in that valley, he said, pointing to a distant depression in the landscape where a thin line of trees suggested a stream. Adeline studied the terrain intently. It seems peaceful, she observed. No smoke signals, no signs of disturbance. That's encouraging, Solomon agreed, though he remained cautious. But we should approach carefully nonetheless. They descended the ridge and continued through increasingly open country. As the sun climbed toward its zenith, Solomon noticed Adeline repeatedly touching the empty chain around her neck, a gesture that seemed unconscious, almost ritualistic. As they approached the valley where the mission was located, Solomon signaled for them to stop. We should proceed on foot from here, he said, dismounting. Less visible, and the horses could use the rest. They secured the horses in a small grove, then continued on foot, moving cautiously through the underbrush. Solomon carried his rifle ready, while Adeline had the revolver he'd given her tucked into her belt. The Cherokee mission came into view gradually, a collection of simple wooden buildings surrounding a central courtyard, with cultivated fields beyond. A small chapel with a cross stood at one end, while what appeared to be dormitories and workshops made up the rest of the complex. From their vantage point on a wooded hillside, they observed the mission for nearly an hour. Children played in the courtyard under the watchful eye of several women in plain dresses. Men worked in the fields or at various tasks around the buildings. Everything appeared peaceful, ordinary. I don't see Hannah, Adeline whispered, anxiety creeping into her voice. Or Sister Marie, the nun who runs the mission. There's a building at the far end, partially hidden by those trees, Solomon pointed out. Could be where they keep the younger children. They descended carefully, keeping to the tree line until they reached the edge of the mission grounds. Then, with a deep breath, Solomon stepped into the open, Adeline at his side. Their appearance caused immediate notice. A tall woman in a simple gray dress approached, her bearing dignified but cautious. Welcome, travelers, she said, her voice carrying a slight French accent. I am Sister Marie. What brings you to our humble mission? Adeline stepped forward. Sister Marie, it's me, Adeline Harper. Recognition dawned on the older woman's face, followed by astonishment and then joy. Adeline, my child, we feared the worst when you didn't return. She embraced Adeline warmly, then held her at arm's length to examine her. You're injured? Healing, Adeline assured her. Sister, where is Hannah? Is she safe? Sister Marie's face sobered. She is here and well, though she misses her mother terribly. Come, she's in the classroom with the other little ones. As they followed Sister Marie toward one of the buildings, Solomon scanned their surroundings continuously, alert for any sign of threat. The mission seemed peaceful, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Sister Marie led them to a small building where the sounds of children reciting lessons could be heard through the open windows. She knocked lightly on the door, then entered. Inside, about a dozen children of various ages sat at simple wooden desks. At the front, a younger nun was leading them in a reading lesson. All activity ceased when they entered. Hannah, Sister Marie called gently. Look who's here, child. A small girl with dark hair and startlingly blue eyes looked up from her slate. For a moment, she stared in disbelief. Then, with a cry that pierced Solomon's heart with its pure joy, she leaped from her seat. Mama! Hannah flew across the room and into Adeline's outstretched arms. Adeline dropped to her knees, heedless of her wound, gathering her daughter close, her face buried in the child's hair. My brave girl, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. My brave, brave girl. Solomon stood back, giving them space for their reunion, but he couldn't help being moved by the scene. After a long moment, Adeline pulled back slightly to look at Hannah's face, wiping tears from the little girl's cheeks. Have you been good for Sister Marie? Hannah nodded solemnly. I've been very quiet, just like you said. And I kept it safe, Mama. She pulled a leather cord from beneath her dress to reveal the silver medallion, a flat disc about the size of a large coin covered in intricate engravings. Hannah's attention turned to Solomon, her blue eyes, so vivid they seemed almost unnatural, studying him with a child's direct curiosity. "Who's that?" she asked. "This is Dr. Pierce," Adeline explained. "He helped Mama when she was hurt. He's a friend." Solomon knelt down to be at the child's eye level. "Hello, Hannah," he said gently. "I've heard a lot about you. Your mother is very proud of you." Hannah regarded him solemnly. "Are you going to help us hide from the bad men?" The simple question, delivered with a child's directness, struck Solomon to the core. "Yes," he answered firmly. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." In Sister Marie's office, Adeline explained their situation while Hannah sat in her lap, playing with the medallion around her neck. "And this man, Maxwell," Sister Marie said gravely, "you believe he may come here?" "It's possible," Solomon answered. "Has anyone unusual visited the mission in the past few weeks? Anyone asking questions about Adeline or Hannah?" Sister Marie shook her head. "No, though we are somewhat isolated here. News travels slowly." "We can't stay long," Adeline said. "Our presence puts everyone here at risk." "But you've only just arrived, and you're still healing," Sister Marie protested. "At least rest for the night. You'll be safer traveling with renewed strength." Solomon and Adeline exchanged glances. "One night," Solomon decided. "We'll leave before dawn tomorrow." As dusk fell, Solomon stood by the window of their small room in the women's dormitory, watching the mission grounds with growing unease. Something felt wrong. The men who had been working in the fields had disappeared, and there was less activity around the buildings than there should have been at this hour. "Something's wrong," he said suddenly, peering more intently into the gathering dusk. "The men working in the fields, they're gone, and there should be more activity around the buildings at this hour." Adeline rose carefully, moving to join him at the window. "Perhaps they've gone to the chapel for evening prayers?" Solomon shook his head. "Sister Marie said prayers were at sundown. It's not quite—" He broke off as movement caught his eye, a shadow detaching itself from the tree line at the edge of the mission grounds. Then another, and another. "We need to go," Solomon said urgently, reaching for his rifle. "Now." "What is it?" Adeline asked, though her body was already moving, gathering Hannah's small form into her arms. "Men approaching from the trees," Solomon replied tersely. "At least 5, moving with purpose. This isn't a social call." They moved quickly but quietly through the dormitory, encountering no one, another concerning sign. The kitchen at the rear of the building was empty. The fire in the large cook stove burned down to embers. Solomon eased open the back door, scanning the area before signaling Adeline to follow. They slipped into the deepening twilight, keeping close to the buildings for cover. "The stables," Solomon whispered. "If we can reach the horses." A scream tore through the evening air, followed by shouts and the sound of breaking glass. The attack had begun on the main mission building. "This way, boy." "Push away," Adeline urged, leading them toward a path that skirted the edge of the property, away from the commotion. "The stables are just beyond that storage shed." They had almost reached the shed when a figure stepped out from behind it, a tall man with a rifle leveled at them. "Well now," he drawled, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Ain't this convenient? Maxwell's going to be mighty pleased when I bring him not just the woman and the brat, but the doctor who marked him too." Solomon froze, his mind racing through options. The man had them dead to rights. Any attempt to raise his own rifle would get them shot. Beside him, Hannah stirred in Adeline's arms, awakened by the commotion. Her eyes widened at the sight of the armed stranger. "Now, nice and easy," the man continued, gesturing with his rifle. "The 3 of you are coming with me. Maxwell's got plans for all of you, especially you, Doc." As he spoke, Solomon noticed movement behind the man, a shadow low to the ground moving with purpose. Before he could process what it might be, a dark figure lunged from the bushes, colliding with the gunman's legs. It was a dikyung, a large black hunting hound that clamped powerful jaws around the man's arm as he cried out in pain and surprise. His rifle discharged harmlessly into the air as he fell. Solomon didn't hesitate. He surged forward, bringing the butt of his own rifle down hard on the man's head, rendering him unconscious. From the trees emerged a boy of about 12, Cherokee by his features, with a determined expression. "This way," he said urgently. "Sister Marie sent me to find you. There are more bad men coming." With no time for questions, they followed the boy and his dog into the trees, away from the sounds of conflict at the mission buildings. The boy led them through the forest with the confidence of someone who knew every tree and rock. After about 20 minutes of swift, silent travel, they emerged at a small clearing where two horses were tethered, their own mounts from earlier. Sister Marie had them brought here when the strangers were first spotted approaching the mission, the boy explained. She said you would need to leave quickly. Thank you, Adeline said, genuine gratitude in her voice. What's your name? Joseph, the boy replied, and this is Crow. He patted the black dog's head affectionately. What about the others at the mission? Solomon asked, concern evident in his voice. Joseph's expression darkened. The sisters were gathering everyone in the chapel when I left. The bad men, he hesitated. They were looking for you, but they were hurting people who wouldn't tell them where you were. Adeline and Solomon exchanged pained glances. Their presence had brought violence to this peaceful place, just as they had feared. We need to go, Solomon said firmly. If we stay, we only put more people in danger. Joseph nodded solemnly. Sister Marie said to tell you to go west, toward the setting sun. She said Maxwell's men would expect you to go north or east. Smart woman, Solomon remarked, helping Adeline mount with Hannah in her arms. Joseph, you should get back to the mission, but be careful. Stay hidden until you're sure it's safe. As they rode away from the mission, the sounds of conflict faded behind them, replaced by the quieter noises of the forest at night. Hannah had fallen asleep again in her mother's arms, exhaustion overcoming even the fear of their situation. Looking at the sleeping child, Solomon felt a renewed determination. This innocent girl deserved a life free from the terror and violence that had marked her early years. Whatever it took, he would help ensure she and Adeline reached safety. Even if that meant a final confrontation with the man who had scarred them all, Renard Maxwell. They rode through the night, pushing their horses as hard as they dared in the darkness. The moon provided just enough light to navigate the unfamiliar terrain as they headed west, away from the mission and the violence they had left behind. Hannah slept against Adeline's chest, secured by a makeshift sling fashioned from Solomon's spare shirt, her small face peaceful, despite the desperate circumstances. Solomon led the way, constantly alert for signs of pursuit. The night remained quiet except for the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional call of nightbirds. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and the mission. We need to rest the horses, Solomon said, reining in beside a small stream flanked by cottonwood trees. And ourselves. Adeline nodded wearily. Her wound had begun to ache again after hours in the saddle, though she had made no complaint. She carefully dismounted, cradling the still sleeping Hannah against her. How's she doing? Solomon asked softly, helping Adeline settle beneath a tree. Children are resilient, Adeline replied, brushing a strand of hair from Hannah's face. More than we sometimes realize. Solomon tended to the horses, then checked his map by the growing light. We've been traveling southwest, he said, tracing their route with his finger. If we continue in this direction, we'll reach the Arkansas River in about 2 days. From there, we could follow it west into the territories. Away from Maxwell, Adeline asked, doubt evident in her voice. Solomon's expression was grim. For a time, perhaps, but he's proven persistent. And now that he knows I'm with you, he left the thought unfinished. Hannah stirred then, her blue eyes opening to the unfamiliar surroundings. For a moment, confusion clouded her features, then recognition as she saw her mother's face. Mama, she whispered, where are we? We're on a journey, little one, Adeline answered, forcing brightness into her tone. Like an adventure. Hannah sat up, taking in the stream, the trees, and finally Solomon, who stood a respectful distance away. Her direct gaze held a maturity beyond her years. The bad men came, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Adeline admitted, but we got away. This is Dr. Pierce, remember? He's helping us. Hannah studied Solomon carefully. He has sad eyes, she observed, with the unfiltered honesty of childhood. Like yours, sometimes. Solomon felt a peculiar twist in his chest at the child's perception. He knelt down to her level. Hello again, Hannah. You've been very brave. The girl considered this, then nodded solemnly. I kept the medallion safe, she said, touching the leather cord around her neck. Papa said it was important. It is, Solomon agreed, and so are you. He rummaged in his saddlebag, producing a piece of jerky and hardtack which he offered to Hannah. It's not much of a breakfast, I'm afraid. Hannah accepted the food without complaint. As she ate, Solomon checked Adeline's wound, concerned that the hard ride might have reopened it. To his relief, the stitches were holding, though the area was red and tender. "We should change the bandage," he said, reaching for his medical bag. Later, Adeline replied, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We need to keep moving." Solomon understood her anxiety but shook his head firmly. 10 minutes to tend to your wound wouldn't make the difference between safety and capture. But infection might mean the difference between life and death. Reluctantly, Adeline agreed. She sent Hannah to collect flowers by the stream, within sight but out of earshot. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly as Solomon cleaned the wound. "Not bad," he assured her, "but it needs attention. You pushed yourself hard yesterday." "I had no choice." "I know." Solomon applied a fresh bandage with practiced efficiency. "But you need to take care of yourself, Adeline. Hannah needs you alive and well." Adeline's eyes followed her daughter, who was carefully selecting wildflowers with serious concentration. "She's all that matters," she said softly. "Everything I've done, every risk I've taken, it's all been for her." "I can see that," Solomon replied. He hesitated, then added, "She has remarkable eyes. Very distinctive." Adeline tensed slightly. "Yes, blue like the sky. Like her birth mother's, I suppose." "And perhaps like her father's?" Solomon suggested carefully. Adeline's gaze snapped to his face. "What are you saying?" "Just an observation," he said evenly. "Maxwell is known for his blue eyes. It's mentioned in military reports." "That doesn't mean—" "No," Solomon agreed. "It doesn't mean anything definitive. But it might explain his interest in finding her, beyond just the medallion." Adeline was silent for a long moment. "If that's true," she finally said, "it's all the more reason to keep her away from him. No child deserves such a father." On that, we agree completely. They resumed their journey within the hour, now traveling through increasingly rugged terrain. The rolling plains gave way to steeper hills and rocky outcroppings that provided good cover but made progress slower. Solomon kept them to game trails and natural valleys, avoiding any sign of human habitation or established routes. Hannah rode in front of Adeline, wide-eyed and alert, taking in everything with quiet curiosity. Occasionally she would ask questions about plants or animals they encountered, which Solomon answered with patient detail, grateful for the momentary distraction from their circumstances. By midday, dark clouds had gathered on the western horizon, promising a storm. The wind picked up, bringing with it the distant scent of rain. "We should find shelter before that hits," Solomon said, eyeing the approaching weather with concern. "Prairie storms can be vicious this time of year." They found refuge in a shallow cave set into a hillside, just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. The space was small, but dry, with enough room for the three of them and their minimal supplies. The horses were tethered under an overhang outside, protected from the worst of the elements. The storm arrived with spectacular fury, sheets of rain driven by howling wind, punctuated by brilliant flashes of lightning and teeth-rattling thunder. Hannah pressed against her mother, frightened by the noise, while Solomon built a small fire just inside the cave entrance, using the sparse kindling they had collected along the way. "Will it last long?" Adeline asked, wrapping an arm around Hannah's shoulders. Solomon shrugged. "Hard to say. Summer storms on the plains can blow through quickly or linger for hours." He smiled reassuringly at Hannah. "Either way, we're safe and dry here." The child relaxed slightly at his words, though she still flinched at each thunderclap. "Could you tell me a story?" she asked suddenly. Sister Maria always told stories during storms. Caught off guard, Solomon looked to Adeline for guidance. "Please, Dr. Pierce," Hannah added, her blue eyes earnest, "just until the thunder stops." "I'm not much of a storyteller," Solomon demurred. "Your mother would probably—" "No, you," Hannah insisted. "I like your voice. It's deep, like Papa's was." Something in Solomon's expression must have softened, because Adeline gave him a small nod of encouragement. "All right then," he agreed, settling more comfortably against the cave wall. "Let me think. I know one my father used to tell me when I was about your age." Hannah leaned forward expectantly, momentarily distracted from the storm. Solomon began slowly, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality that seemed to compete with the thunder outside. "Long ago, in the mountains far to the east, there lived a healer named Gray Fox. He was known throughout the land for his skill with herbs and medicines, and people traveled great distances to seek his help. As he spoke, crafting a simple tale about the healer who searched for a rare plant to save his village from illness, Solomon watched Hannah's face. The fear gradually left her eyes, replaced by rapt attention. Even Adeline seemed caught up in the story, the tension in her shoulders easing as she listened. And so, he concluded, Gray Fox returned to his people, not with the plant he had sought, but with knowledge far more valuable, that the true healing they needed was already within them, in the courage and care they showed for one another. The story finished just as the storm began to abate, the thunder now a distant rumble rather than the immediate crashes that had frightened Hannah. I like that, the child declared. Was Gray Fox a real person? Solomon smiled. My father always said he was. I suppose he might have been, in some form or another. Many of the best stories have roots in truth. Hannah nodded, accepting this answer with the gravity of a much older person. Like the stories of the Golden Path, she said. Papa said those were true too. The Golden Path? Solomon questioned, glancing at Adeline. It's what Joshua called the map on the medallion, Adeline explained. He said it was more than just directions to gold. It was a path to preserving something precious. Hannah touched the medallion through her dress. Papa showed me the markings, said they were like a special language that only people who respected the old ways could understand. Your papa was a wise man, Solomon said, genuine admiration in his voice. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving behind the fresh scent of wet earth and vegetation. Solomon moved to the cave entrance, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The land lay peaceful and empty under the storm-washed sky, no hint of pursuit or danger. We should be able to continue soon, he reported, returning to the fire. Once the ground has dried a bit, making tracking more difficult. Adeline nodded, but he noticed her wince slightly as she shifted position. The wound's bothering you, he observed. Not a question, but a statement. It's nothing, she replied automatically. Solomon shook his head. Let me check it before we leave, and I want you to take some willow bark tea for the pain. I don't... Please, Mama, Hannah interrupted. Let the doctor help. That's what doctors do. Adeline's resistance crumbled under her daughter's earnest gaze. All right, but quickly. While Solomon prepared the tea and gathered his medical supplies, Hannah approached him hesitantly. Dr. Pierce, she said, her voice small but determined. Yes, Hannah. Can I help? Papa was teaching me about medicines from plants. He said I had a healer's hands. Something about the child's solemn request touched Solomon deeply. Of course, he replied. You can help me prepare the bandages. Under his guidance, Hannah carefully folded the clean strips of cloth, her small fingers moving with surprising dexterity and purpose. As they worked side by side, Solomon felt an unexpected sense of connection with this remarkable child, not just because of her possibly being Maxwell's daughter, but because of the innate compassion and wisdom she displayed. You're very good at this, he told her honestly. Your papa was right about your healer's hands. Hannah beamed at the praise, then grew serious again. Will we ever go home? She asked suddenly. To our cabin, by the big rocks? Solomon hesitated, unsure how to answer. It was Adeline who responded, having overheard the question. No, little one, she said gently, but we'll find a new home, somewhere safe where the bad men can't find us. With Dr. Pierce? Hannah asked, looking between them. An awkward silence fell. Solomon busied himself with the willow bark tea, avoiding Adeline's eyes. Dr. Pierce is helping us now, Adeline finally said. After that, well, we'll see. It wasn't a satisfying answer, but Hannah seemed to accept it, returning to her task with the bandages. The matter of what would happen after their immediate danger had passed remained unspoken between the adults, a question neither was ready to address. They traveled steadily westward for 2 more days, keeping to wilderness routes and crossing only the smallest settlements when absolutely necessary. The weather remained fair, which sped their progress but also made tracking easier for anyone following their trail. Solomon maintained a vigilant watch, frequently stopping to survey their back trail for signs of pursuit. So far, they had seen nothing suspicious, but he knew better than to assume they had lost Maxwell's men entirely. Hannah had adapted to the journey with remarkable resilience, rarely complaining despite the discomfort of long hours in the saddle. She had taken to riding with Solomon for part of each day, giving Adeline a break and seemingly enjoying the higher vantage point from atop his larger horse. During these times, she would pepper him with questions about plants, animals, and the workings of the human body, her curiosity insatiable. Solomon answered each query with patience, finding unexpected pleasure in sharing his knowledge with such an eager pupil. By late afternoon on the third day since fleeing the mission, they reached the Arkansas River, a broad, swift-flowing watercourse that marked the boundary between settled lands and the wilder territories beyond. They made camp on a bluff overlooking the river, with good visibility in all directions and multiple escape routes should they be needed. As Solomon prepared a modest fire for cooking, Hannah explored the immediate area under Adeline's watchful eye, collecting interesting rocks and wildflowers with the boundless enthusiasm of childhood. Watching them together, the fierce protectiveness in Adeline's gaze, the complete trust in Hannah's, Solomon felt an unexpected pang of longing for what might have been in his own life, had circumstances been different. "We'll need to cross the river tomorrow," he said when Adeline returned with Hannah to the campsite. "There's a ford about 2 miles downstream, according to my map, shallow enough to wade if the water levels aren't too high from the recent rains." Adeline nodded, setting down Hannah's botanical treasures. "And then? Where do we go from there?" It was a question they had both been avoiding, the matter of their ultimate destination. Temporary flight could not be a permanent solution. "There are settlements in the Western Territories," Solomon suggested. "Small, isolated communities where strangers aren't unusual. Places where a woman and child might start fresh without too many questions asked." "And you?" Adeline asked quietly, while Hannah was distracted, arranging her collection of stones. Solomon hesitated. "I haven't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "One step at a time has been my approach." "A doctor would be welcomed in such settlements," she observed, "especially one with experience." The implication hung in the air between them. Before Solomon could respond, Hannah interrupted with an excited exclamation. "Look what I found," she announced, holding up a piece of quartz that caught the late afternoon sunlight. "It's like a tiny star." Solomon examined the crystal with appropriate admiration. "It's beautiful, Hannah. You have a good eye for special things." "Papa said that too," she replied, her face momentarily clouding at the memory. "He said I could see things other people missed." He was right, Solomon agreed. "It's an important gift to have." While Hannah returned to her rock collection, Solomon and Adeline prepared a simple meal of jerky, softened in a broth with wild onions and the last of their hardtack. As they ate around the small fire, the conversation turned to practicalities. "Our supplies are running low," Adeline noted. "We'll need to restock soon." Solomon nodded. "There's a trading post marked on my map about a day's ride past the river crossing. Small, out of the way. Should be safe enough for a quick stop." "And money?" Adeline asked. "I have some," Solomon assured her. "Not a fortune, but enough for basic necessities." The sun was setting now, painting the western sky in dramatic hues of orange and gold. Hannah watched the spectacle with wide-eyed wonder, while Adeline's face took on a thoughtful expression. "What if we use the medallion?" she suggested suddenly. "Not to find the gold ourselves, but to bargain with it. Sell the map to someone who could use it properly for the purposes Joshua intended." Solomon considered this. "It's possible," he acknowledged, "but risky. If word got out about what you possessed, it might bring more people like Maxwell," Adeline finished his thought. "I know, but it might also provide us with the means to truly disappear, to start somewhere new where he could never find us." "It's something to consider," Solomon agreed, "but not a decision to make hastily." As darkness fell fully, Hannah began to nod off, exhausted from the day's journey and exploration. Adeline created a soft bed for her using their spare clothing and blankets, tucking her daughter in with tender care. "Sleep well, my brave one," she whispered, pressing a kiss to Hannah's forehead. The child was asleep and almost instantly, her breathing deep and even, one small hand still clutching the piece of quartz she had found earlier. Adeline watched her for a long moment before joining Solomon by the fire. "She trusts you," she said quietly. "Hannah doesn't warm to people easily, not since Joshua's death, but she's comfortable with you." Solomon poked at the embers with a stick. "She's an extraordinary child, perceptive, intelligent, compassionate. You've raised her well, Adeline." "Thank you." She was silent for a moment, then added, "I keep thinking about what you said before, about her eyes, about Maxwell possibly being her father." Solomon waited, sensing she needed to speak her thoughts aloud. If it's true, Adeline continued, does that change who she is? What she might become? No, Solomon answered without hesitation. We are not merely the sum of our bloodlines, Adeline. Hannah is who she is because of the love and care you and Joshua gave her, the values you instilled. Our origins may influence us, but they don't determine our character. You sound very certain, Adeline observed. Solomon's gaze was distant, focused on memories. My father was a good physician, but a cruel man in private, demanding, unforgiving, quick to anger. I made a conscious choice not to follow that part of his example. He looked directly at Adeline. We always have choices, even when there are difficult ones. She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. I just want her to have a chance at a normal life, to grow up without fear, without always looking over her shoulder. She will, Solomon promised, though he knew it was a promise he might not have the power to keep. They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned lower. Eventually, Adeline spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did you really come with me, Solomon? The truth. He considered the question carefully. At first, it was because I felt responsible. You were injured on my land, pursued by a man with whom I had unfinished business. It seemed fated somehow. And now? Solomon looked toward Hannah's sleeping form, then back to Adeline. Now I think perhaps it was more than fate. Perhaps it was opportunity, a chance to do something genuinely good after years of merely surviving. You saved my life, Adeline pointed out. That's more than merely surviving. Perhaps, he acknowledged, but it's not the same as having purpose, as being part of something meaningful. He paused. You and Hannah, you've reminded me of that. The firelight cast warm shadows across Adeline's face, softening the lines of worry that had become habitual there. For a moment, Solomon could see what she might have looked like in another life, without the weight of fear and constant vigilance. I should check the horses, he said abruptly. Rising to his feet, the moment had grown too intimate, too revealing, and old habits of emotional distance reasserted themselves. While he was securing the horses for the night, making sure they were properly hobbled but comfortable, Adeline approached with a cup of coffee. Peace offering, she said, handing him the tin cup. I didn't mean to pry. You weren't, Solomon assured her, accepting the coffee gratefully. It's a fair question. One I've asked myself more than once these past days. Adeline leaned against the trunk of a cottonwood tree, looking up at the star-filled sky. I never properly thanked you, she said, for all of this, for risking your life for us. No thanks necessary, Solomon replied. I made my choice freely. Still, Adeline insisted, I want you to know that whatever happens, whatever we face ahead, I'm grateful. Hannah and I both are. Solomon nodded his acknowledgement, somewhat uncomfortable with her gratitude. They stood together in silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts under the vast canopy of stars. I'll take first watch, he finally said. You should rest. Adeline didn't argue, her exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. Wake me in a few hours, she instructed, turning back toward the camp. Solomon watched her go, then positioned himself on a rock outcropping with good visibility in all directions. The night was clear and still, with only the murmur of the river and the occasional call of a nightbird to break the silence. His thoughts wandered as he maintained his vigil. What exactly was he doing here, riding across the frontier with a woman and child he barely knew? What did he imagine the outcome would be? Even if they successfully evaded Maxwell, what then? The question circled in his mind without resolution. For 7 years he had lived in isolation, deliberately distancing himself from human connections after losing everything that mattered. Now, in the space of a week, he had allowed himself to be drawn into Adeline and Hannah's lives, to feel something beyond the numb acceptance that had been his emotional state for so long. It was terrifying in its way, and yet he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The hours passed quietly. When it came time to wake Adeline for her watch, Solomon found her already stirring as if some internal clock had alerted her to the changing of the guard. All quiet? She asked, voice husky with sleep. Yes, he confirmed. Nothing but owls and coyotes. They traded places, Adeline taking up position on the outcropping while Solomon settled near Hannah's sleeping form. Despite his exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. He found himself watching the child's peaceful face in the faint light of the dying fire, struck again by her resemblance to someone he couldn't quite place. It wasn't just Maxwell, though the blue eyes were certainly reminiscent of the man. There was something else, something in the shape of her face, the curve of her cheek that tugged at Solomon's memory. The thought followed him into uneasy dreams where familiar faces shifted and blurred, and the line between past and present dissolved like morning mist. Dawn broke clear and cool, with a fine mist rising from the river below their campsite. Solomon woke to find Hannah sitting cross-legged beside him, solemnly studying his face. "Good morning," he said, suppressing a start of surprise. "You're up early." "The birds woke me," she explained, "and I was hungry." Solomon sat up, running a hand through his hair. "Well, we should do something about that hunger, shouldn't we?" He rummaged through their supplies, producing the last of their jerky and a handful of dried berries. Hannah accepted them with a polite, "Thank you," then asked, "Can I learn more about medicines today, while we ride?" "Of course," Solomon agreed, touched by her continued interest. "Today we can talk about plants that help with pain, like the willow bark we use for your mother." Hannah nodded seriously. "I want to know all the plants, for when I'm a healer like you and Papa." Solomon felt an unexpected tightness in his chest at her simple declaration. "You'd make an excellent healer, Hannah." Adeline returned from her watch as they were discussing the merits of various medicinal herbs. She looked tired but alert, her rifle balanced casually in the crook of her arm. "Any trouble?" Solomon asked, handing her a cup of coffee. She shook her head. "Nothing, almost too quiet." He understood her concern. 3 days without sign of pursuit seemed unlikely, given Maxwell's determination and resources. "We should cross the river early," he decided. "Be on our way before the day gets too warm." They broke camp efficiently, loading their minimal gear onto the horses. Before mounting, Solomon studied the area carefully, looking for any sign that they had been observed during the night. The ground revealed nothing suspicious, no fresh tracks, no disturbed vegetation. Still, a sense of unease persisted as they made their way downstream to the ford. Something about the perfect quiet of the morning, the absence of wildlife sounds that should have been present. It felt watchful, expectant. The ford appeared much as the map had indicated, a broad, shallow stretch of river, where the water spread out over a gravel bed. At its deepest point, it would likely reach the horses' bellies, but nothing more treacherous. "I'll go first," Solomon said, guiding his horse into the water. "Follow exactly in my path." The river was cold, fed by mountain snowmelt many miles to the west. The horse snorted in protest but moved forward steadily under Solomon's firm guidance. Behind him, Adeline waited until he had reached the midpoint before urging her mount to follow, Hannah secured in front of her. They were halfway across when Solomon heard it, a faint but distinctive sound that didn't belong to the natural environment, the metallic click of a rifle hammer being cocked. "Adeline!" he shouted in warning, already wheeling his horse around. Too late. On the bank they had just left, 3 mounted men emerged from the tree line, rifles raised. On the opposite shore, 2 more appeared, effectively cutting off their escape in both directions. "Well now," called a familiar voice. "Isn't this convenient? The fish have swum right into our net." Davis, the guard from Maxwell's camp, whom Adeline had identified days earlier, rode forward to the edge of the river. His face bore a fresh scar, a gift from the book at the mission, Solomon guessed. "Nowhere to run this time," Davis continued, satisfaction evident in his tone. "Maxwell's waiting, and he's mighty eager to see all of you." Solomon assessed their situation with grim calculation. 5 armed men, strategically positioned. The river current, while not dangerous at this crossing, still limited their maneuverability. And Hannah, her safety complicated any potential resistance. "What does Maxwell want?" he called, playing for time while his mind raced through options. Davis laughed. "From you, Doc, I reckon he wants payback for that pretty face you gave him. From the woman, that little trinket around the brat's neck. And from the brat herself?" He shrugged. "That's between him and her. Not my business." Solomon felt Adeline's horse draw up beside his in the middle of the river. Her face was a mask of controlled fear and fury, one arm wrapped protectively around Hannah. "If you want the medallion, take it and let us go," she offered, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "The child has nothing to do with this." "Wish it were that simple, ma'am," Davis replied with mock regret. But my orders are to bring all three of you, alive, preferably, though Maxwell didn't specify what condition you needed to be in. His grin turned ugly. So why don't you all just come along nice and peaceful like? Save everyone some trouble. Solomon's hand inched toward his rifle, but Davis noticed the movement. He warned, raising his own weapon. Don't try it, Doc. You might get one of us, but the others would cut you down before you could blink. And then, who'd protect the ladies? He was right, Solomon knew. Direct confrontation here would be suicide, and likely get Adeline and Hannah killed as well. What guarantee do we have that Maxwell won't kill us once he has what he wants? Solomon demanded, still seeking any advantage or delay. Davis shrugged. None at all, but I can guarantee what'll happen if you resist right now. He nodded to one of his men on the far bank, who raised his rifle and fired a warning shot that kicked up water just feet from them. Hannah whimpered, burying her face against Adeline's chest. The sound sent a surge of protective rage through Solomon, but he forced himself to remain calm. All right, he said finally. We'll come, but the child rides with me, and no one lays a hand on either of them. Davis considered this, then nodded. Fair enough for now. Hand over your weapons, though, both of you. With reluctant movements, Solomon unsheathed his rifle and revolver, holding them out. One of Davis's men splashed into the river to collect them, along with Adeline's revolver. Now the little lady comes to you, Davis directed. Slow and careful. Adeline's eyes met Solomon's, a world of fear and desperate hope conveyed in that single glance. She whispered something to Hannah, who nodded solemnly, then helped the child transfer to Solomon's horse. Hannah's small arms wrapped around Solomon's waist as he settled her in front of him. She was trembling but silent, showing remarkable courage for one so young. It will be all right, he murmured to her, though he had no right to make such a promise. I won't let anything happen to you or your mother. This way, Davis ordered, turning his horse. Maxwell's waiting at a camp about 3 hours' ride from here. And don't get any ideas about running. My boys are excellent shots, and they'll aim for the horses first, leave you all stranded in unfriendly territory. They had no choice but to obey. Solomon guided his horse out of the river, Hannah secure before him, while Adeline followed on her mount, surrounded by armed men. As they formed into a traveling group, Solomon caught Adeline's eye and gave her a slight nod, a silent communication that this was not the end, that he would find a way out of this trap. Whether she believed it, whether he believed it himself, was another question entirely. The sun climbed higher as they rode east, retracing much of the ground they had covered in the previous days. Davis and his men maintained a vigilant watch, weapons always at the ready. Conversation was minimal, limited to terse directions and occasional crude jokes among the captors. Hannah remained quiet in front of Solomon, her small body tense but controlled. Occasionally she would look up at him, her blue eyes wide with questions he couldn't answer. Remember our story about Gray Fox, he whispered to her at one point. Remember how he never gave up, even when things seemed hopeless? She nodded slightly. That's what we'll do too, he promised. We won't give up. The child seemed to take comfort in this, leaning back against him with a small sigh. Solomon felt an overwhelming surge of protectiveness, coupled with a cold determination. Whatever happened when they reached Maxwell, he would not allow Hannah to be harmed, even if it meant sacrificing himself. As the sun passed its zenith, the terrain began to look increasingly familiar. They were approaching the area where the Cherokee mission was located, Solomon realized. Had Maxwell made his base there, after driving out or capturing the inhabitants? The thought sickened him, but their path diverged before reaching the mission, turning northeast toward a line of low hills. In a valley between two such hills, smoke from campfires was visible. Their destination, presumably. Almost there, Davis announced with satisfaction. Maxwell will be pleased, might even give me a bonus for bringing in all three of you without a scratch. Solomon remained silent, his mind working furiously. If they were delivered to Maxwell intact, it would be their last chance. Once separated, their odds of escape would diminish to nearly nothing. As they descended into the valley, the camp came into full view, a collection of perhaps 10 tents arranged in a rough circle with horses picketed nearby and men moving about on various tasks. It was a well-organized operation, Solomon noted with dismay. Not just a few hired guns, but something more permanent and professional. At the center of the camp stood a larger tent, distinguished by its size and the two armed guards flanking its entrance. Maxwell's quarters, without a doubt. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. Men stopped their activities to watch as Davis led the captives into the center of the camp. Solomon felt Hannah shrink against him, overwhelmed by the sudden scrutiny of so many hostile eyes. "It's all right," he murmured to her. "Just stay close to me." Davis dismounted with a flourish. "Where's Maxwell?" he demanded of one of the guards. "I've brought him a prize he's been hunting for quite some time." "In his tent," the guard replied, eyeing the captives with curiosity. "Said to bring them to him directly when you arrived." Davis nodded, then gestured for Solomon and Adeline to dismount. "End of the line, folks. Time to meet the man himself." Solomon carefully lifted Hannah down before swinging out of the saddle himself. He kept the child close as Adeline joined them, her face pale but composed. "Remember what I promised," Solomon said quietly to Hannah. "No matter what happens in there." She nodded, her small hand finding his and holding tight. With Davis leading and armed men surrounding them, they were marched toward the large tent. The canvas flap was pulled aside, revealing a surprisingly well-appointed interior. A field desk, folding chairs, even a small oriental carpet underfoot. And there, rising from behind the desk, with the deliberate movements of a man savoring a long-anticipated moment, stood Renard Maxwell. He was taller than Solomon remembered, broad-shouldered and imposing despite being in his 50s. His hair, once dark, was now silver at the temples, adding a distinguished air that belied his ruthless nature. But it was his face that commanded attention. Handsome still on the right side, but the left marked by the scar that Solomon had deliberately left 7 years ago. A long, puckered line that ran from temple to brow, pulling the corner of his mouth into a permanent sneer. "Dr. Pierce," Maxwell said, his voice cultured and controlled. "How very good to see you again. It's been far too long." His gaze shifted to Adeline, a cold smile touching his lips. "And Mrs. Harper, you led us on quite a chase, my dear." Finally, his eyes fell on Hannah, who had partially hidden herself behind Solomon's leg. Something flickered in Maxwell's expression then, a complex emotion that Solomon couldn't quite identify. "And this must be the child," Maxwell said softly. "Hannah, isn't it? Come here, little one. Let me look at you properly." Hannah shrank further behind Solomon, who placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Leave her alone, Maxwell," he said evenly. "Your quarrel is with me, not with an innocent child." Maxwell's smile never wavered. "On the contrary, doctor, my interest in the child is quite specific." His eyes, the same startling blue as Hannah's, gleamed with anticipation. "After all, she's carrying something that belongs to me. And unless I'm very much mistaken, she herself is something that belongs to me as well." The implication hung in the air like a thundercloud. Adeline stepped forward, placing herself between Maxwell and Hannah. "You're wrong," she said fiercely. "She belongs to no one but herself, and I am her mother in every way that matters." Maxwell regarded her with cold amusement. "We shall see about that. But first," he turned his attention back to Solomon. "We have unfinished business, you and I. A debt 7 years in the making." Solomon met his gaze steadily. "If it's revenge you want, take it. But let them go. The medallion too, if that's what you're after." "Oh, I want all of those things," Maxwell replied pleasantly. "The medallion, my revenge, and the truth about the child, and I intend to have them all." He gestured to Davis. "Take the woman and child to the holding tent. I wish to speak with the good doctor alone first." "No," Adeline protested, reaching for Hannah. "Mama," Hannah cried, clinging to Solomon's leg. "I'm afraid I must insist," Maxwell said, his voice hardening. He nodded to Davis, who moved toward Adeline with grim purpose. "It's all right," Solomon said quickly to Hannah, kneeling to her level. "Go with your mother for now. I'll come for you soon." The child's eyes, wide with fear and confusion, searched his face. "You promise?" "I promise," Solomon replied, with more conviction than he felt. "Remember Gray Fox. Remember what I told you." Hannah nodded solemnly, then allowed Adeline to pull her away. As they were led from the tent, Adeline cast one desperate glance back at Solomon, a look that conveyed both fear and a fierce determination to protect her child at any cost. Then they were gone, and Solomon was alone with the man whose face he had scarred, whose path had crossed his once again through some twisted design of fate. Now then, Doctor, Maxwell said, retaking his seat and gesturing for Solomon to do the same. Let us discuss the terms of your redemption and theirs. Now then, Doctor, Maxwell said, retaking his seat and gesturing for Solomon to do the same. Let us discuss the terms of your redemption and theirs. Solomon remained standing, his posture rigid with controlled anger. I have nothing to discuss with you, Maxwell, except the immediate release of Adeline and Hannah. Maxwell chuckled, the sound devoid of genuine mirth. Always the righteous one. Please sit. I insist. He motioned to one of the guards who pressed the muzzle of a rifle against Solomon's back. Reluctantly, Solomon took the offered chair, his mind racing through escape scenarios, each one more desperate than the last. You know, Maxwell began conversationally, pouring amber liquid from a crystal decanter into 2 glasses. I've imagined this meeting for 7 years. 7 years of looking in the mirror each day at your handiwork, Doctor. 7 years of planning exactly how I would repay the debt. He pushed one glass towards Solomon, who left it untouched. And yet, Maxwell continued, fate has a curious way of complicating matters. I sought you for revenge, and I sought the woman for the medallion. I never expected to find them together. His blue eyes gleamed with cold amusement. Nor did I expect to find something far more precious in their company. The child has nothing to do with this, Solomon said firmly. On the contrary. Maxwell took a slow sip of his drink. She has everything to do with it. Haven't you wondered, Doctor? Haven't you looked into those remarkable blue eyes and felt a hint of recognition? Solomon's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. What are you implying? Not implying, stating. Maxwell set down his glass with deliberate precision. The child is mine by blood, but there's more to the story, isn't there? Something about her that's been nagging at your physician's mind since you first saw her. A terrible suspicion began to form in Solomon's thoughts, one he had been subconsciously avoiding since meeting Hannah. What do you know about the child's mother? Maxwell smiled, the expression distorting the scar on his face into something grotesque. Ah, now we come to it. The woman called herself Beth when she reached the Cherokee village, didn't she? A convenient shortening of her true name. Elizabeth, Solomon whispered, the name torn from him like a physical wound. Indeed, your beloved wife, Dr. Pierce. Not quite as dead as you believed. The world seemed to tilt beneath Solomon. Impossible. Elizabeth died in the raid. I saw the burned hospital. The bodies. You saw what I wanted you to see, Maxwell interrupted. Charred corpses are difficult to identify, especially in the chaos of war. Elizabeth was quite alive when I found her among the wounded. Quite beautiful, despite her injuries. Solomon lunged across the desk, hands reaching for Maxwell's throat, but the guard's rifle butt struck him hard across the back, sending him crashing to the floor. Contain yourself, Doctor, Maxwell said calmly as Solomon struggled back to his feet. I haven't finished my story. If you touched her, Solomon began, his voice a dangerous growl. Oh, I did more than touch her. I saved her life, nursed her back to health. She didn't remember much at first. The explosion had affected her memory. By the time she realized who I was, who she was, Maxwell shrugged. We had become quite close, and she was carrying my child. Solomon's world narrowed to a pinpoint of rage and grief. You're lying. Look at the child, Doctor. Those eyes, my color certainly, but that shape, the curve of her cheek, surely you've noticed the resemblance. Hannah is as much yours as she is mine, in a manner of speaking. Your wife's daughter, my blood, a perfect instrument of revenge, wouldn't you say? The realization struck Solomon with physical force. The familiarity in Hannah's features that had nagged at him. It wasn't just imagination. She had Elizabeth's face, her expressions, the same quiet perceptiveness. When did she remember? Solomon asked hoarsely. When did Elizabeth remember who she was? Maxwell's expression darkened. After about a year, she became difficult then, kept insisting she needed to find you. I couldn't allow that, of course. He traced the scar on his face with one finger. Not after what you'd done to me. So I kept her close. But Elizabeth was resourceful. I'll give her that. She waited until the pregnancy was advanced, then fled in the night. It took my men months to track her to the Cherokee village, only to discover she'd died in childbirth. And the woman had already taken the child, Solomon concluded, thinking of Adeline's story. Mrs. Harper, Maxwell sneered. Yes, by the time my men found the village, the squaw and her husband had disappeared with my daughter. And now here we are. A rather poetic reunion, wouldn't you agree? Solomon struggled to process the enormity of what he was hearing. Elizabeth had been alive all this time, had given birth to Hannah, had died believing he would never know the truth. What do you want, Maxwell? He asked finally, his voice hollow. Maxwell leaned forward, eyes glittering. Everything, Doctor. The medallion for starters, the map to a gold deposit that could finance an empire. My daughter who rightfully belongs with her father. And you? His smile widened. For you, I've designed a special kind of suffering. Hannah will never be yours, Solomon said flatly. She belongs with Adeline, the only mother she's ever known. That's where you're wrong. Maxwell rose, circling the desk to stand over Solomon. I'm offering you a choice, Doctor. A choice between the woman and the child. One lives, one dies. You decide. Solomon stared at him in horror. You're insane. On the contrary, I'm exceedingly rational. This is justice, the scales balanced at last. You took something precious from me. He touched his scarred face. Now I take something precious from you. But I'm giving you the power of choice more than you ever gave me. I won't choose, Solomon said firmly. Take my life instead. Maxwell laughed. So predictable. No, Doctor, that would be too easy. You will choose, or I will kill them both, along with everyone at that mission where you hid them. My men are already in position, awaiting my orders. Solomon's mind raced. Maxwell was clearly unhinged, but dangerous in his delusion. He needed to buy time, to find a way out for all of them. I need to see them, he said finally, before I make any decision. Maxwell considered this, then nodded. A reasonable request. I am not without mercy. He gestured to the guard. Take the doctor to the holding tent. Let him say his goodbyes. He has until dawn to decide. The guard hauled Solomon to his feet and marched him from the tent. Outside, the camp bustled with activity, men cleaning weapons and preparing meals. At least 20 armed men, Solomon counted silently, too many for direct confrontation. They approached a smaller tent at the edge of the camp, guarded by a single man with a shotgun. At a nod from Solomon's escort, the guard pulled back the tent flap. Inside, Adeline sat with Hannah in her lap, whispering reassurances. Both looked up as Solomon entered, relief washing over their faces. Solomon, Adeline exclaimed, rising quickly. Are you hurt? I'm fine, he assured her as the guard stepped outside, leaving them a moment of privacy. Are you both all right? We're unharmed, Adeline confirmed, her eyes questioning. What did Maxwell want? Solomon glanced at Hannah, then back to Adeline. We need to talk, he said quietly, but not in front of Hannah. Understanding his meaning, Adeline turned to her daughter. Hannah, sweetheart, can you count all the stitches in that blanket for me? I need to know exactly how many there are. The child nodded solemnly, recognizing the adult need for privacy, but accepting the task with characteristic seriousness. She moved to the far corner of the tent and began counting in a whispered voice. Solomon drew Adeline close, speaking in the barest whisper. Maxwell told me something. About Hannah's mother. About Elizabeth. Adeline's eyes widened. What about her? She was my wife, Adeline. The woman who gave you Hannah, Beth, was Elizabeth Pierce, my wife whom I thought died in the war. Adeline staggered slightly, her face draining of color. That's impossible. How could she? Maxwell took her from the hospital before it burned. She lost her memory for a time. When she remembered, she escaped, pregnant with Hannah. The words came out in a rush, each one painful to speak. Hannah is Elizabeth's daughter, and Maxwell's. Adeline pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Those eyes, I always wondered. But Solomon, that means… Hannah is, in a way, my stepdaughter. He finished, the realization still raw. Elizabeth's child. For a long moment, Adeline was silent, absorbing the revelation. Then, with visible effort, she straightened her shoulders. It changes nothing about how I feel for her, she said firmly. She is my daughter in all the ways that matter. I know, Solomon assured her, and we need to get her away from here. Maxwell wants the medallion and Hannah. He's given me until dawn to choose between you and her. He plans to kill one of you as revenge for the scar I gave him." Adeline's expression hardened. "He'll never touch Hannah. I'll die first." "No one is dying," Solomon said with quiet intensity. "We're going to escape. Tonight." "How? The camp is full of armed men." Solomon glanced toward the tent flap. "There's a storm coming. I can smell it in the air. We'll use the confusion to our advantage." He quickly outlined his plan, speaking in urgent whispers while Hannah continued her counting in the corner. When he finished, Adeline nodded, her face set with determination. "It's risky." "It's our only chance," Solomon replied. "Are you with me?" Adeline squeezed his hand. "Always." Just then Hannah returned, her task complete. 473 stitches, she announced proudly. "I counted them twice to be sure." Solomon knelt to her level, smiling despite the gravity of their situation. "That's excellent work, Hannah. You have a healer's attention to detail." The child beamed at the praise. "Are we going home now?" she asked hopefully. "Soon," Solomon promised. "Very soon. But first, I need to teach you a special game. A hiding game. Can you do that?" Hannah nodded solemnly. "I'm good at hiding. Papa taught me." "I know you are. That's why I need your help tonight." Solomon glanced at Adeline, who gave him an encouraging nod. Together they began explaining the game to Hannah in terms the child could understand without causing fear. Outside, the wind began to rise, carrying the distant rumble of thunder. The storm was coming, right on schedule. Night fell swiftly, bringing with it the storm Solomon had predicted. Rain lashed the camp in horizontal sheets, driven by a howling wind that threatened to tear the smaller tents from their moorings. Men huddled in whatever shelter they could find, cursing the weather and passing bottles to stay warm. In the holding tent, Solomon, Adeline, and Hannah sat huddled together beneath a thin blanket. They had been brought a meager supper hours earlier, which Solomon had carefully examined before allowing Adeline and Hannah to eat. Now they waited, listening to the storm rage around them. "Almost time," Solomon murmured, feeling Adeline tense beside him. "The guard is sheltering by that wagon. I can see his shadow when the lightning flashes." Adeline nodded, her face resolute. "I'm ready." Solomon turned to Hannah. "Remember what we practiced? Stay small and quiet, just like the rabbit in the story." "I remember," Hannah whispered, her soy face serious but unafraid. "Until you or Mama calls the special word." "That's right, the word is sunrise. Only come out when you hear one of us say sunrise." Solomon squeezed her shoulder gently. "You're the bravest girl I've ever known, Hannah." The child's eyes, so like Elizabeth's in shape and Maxwell's in color, shone with trust. "I know you'll come back, just like in the Gray Fox story." Solomon swallowed hard, then turned to Adeline. "It's time." With practiced movements, Solomon took the small packet of herbs he'd managed to conceal in his boot, plants he'd recognized growing at the edge of the camp and had surreptitiously gathered during their arrival. He crushed them between his fingers, then nodded to Adeline. She began to scream, a piercing, terrified sound that cut through even the howling of the wind. "Help, please, someone help. She's choking. My daughter is choking." Solomon joined in. "Guard, get help. The child can't breathe." Their panicked cries had the desired effect. The tent flap was thrown back as the guard rushed in, rifle at the ready, but clearly unprepared for a medical emergency. "What the devil?" he began. Solomon thrust the crushed herbs into the guard's face, directly under his nose. The man inhaled instinctively, then staggered as the potent mixture took effect. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed in an unconscious heap. "Foxglove and Jimson weed," Solomon explained tersely as he relieved the man of his weapons. "Enough to knock him out, not kill him. Hannah, time for the hiding game." With quick efficiency, they created a hiding spot for Hannah beneath the guard's abandoned coat and some empty sacks in the corner of the tent. The child crawled in without hesitation, her movements silent and practiced. "Remember, stay hidden until you hear the word," Adeline whispered, pressing a quick kiss to Hannah's forehead before covering her completely. Solomon took the guard's rifle, checking that it was loaded. "Stay close to me," he instructed Adeline, handing her the man's revolver. "Head for the horses. Don't stop for anything." She nodded, gripping the weapon with familiar confidence. "Let's go." They slipped from the tent into the storm. The rain provided excellent cover, reducing visibility to mere feet and masking the sounds of their movement. Solomon led the way, keeping to the shadows between tents, avoiding the occasional figure hunched against the weather. They had nearly reached the picket line where the horses were tethered when a shout went up from behind them. "Prisoners escaping! To arms! To arms! Run!" Solomon urged, abandoning stealth for speed. Adeline matched his pace, her smaller frame belying her strength and determination. They reached the horses as the first shots rang out, bullets whining past them into the darkness. Solomon boosted Adeline onto the nearest mount, her own chestnut mare fortuitously, then swung himself onto another. They kicked the horses into motion just as more armed men appeared, shouting and firing wildly into the rain. "Back to the tent!" Solomon shouted over the storm. "For Hannah!" They wheeled the horses around, charging directly toward their pursuers. The unexpected frontal assault scattered the men, who hadn't anticipated such boldness. Solomon fired the rifle one-handed, not aiming to kill, but to create confusion and fear. Bullets tore through the air around them as they galloped back toward the holding tent. One grazed Solomon's shoulder, a line of fire that he barely registered in the rush of adrenaline. They dismounted in a synchronized movement, leaving the horses as temporary cover. "I'll get Hannah," Adeline said, crouching low. "Cover me." Solomon nodded, positioning himself with the rifle braced against his shoulder. His old sniper instincts returned as if they'd never left, his breathing slowing, his focus narrowing to clear, precise awareness of distance, wind, and movement. A figure appeared through the rain, running toward them. Solomon's finger tightened on the trigger, then relaxed as he recognized Davis, Maxwell's lieutenant. He adjusted his aim slightly and fired. Davis went down with a cry of pain, clutching his leg where Solomon's bullet had deliberately struck. Adeline disappeared into the tent, emerging moments later with Hannah wrapped in her arms. "I've got her!" she called. Solomon provided covering fire as they raced back to the horses. He helped lift Hannah onto Adeline's mount, then swung into his own saddle. They were turning to flee when a commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Stop!" Renard Maxwell stood before them, a revolver in each hand, his scarred face contorted with rage. He fired, the bullet striking Solomon's horse in the flank. The animal reared in pain, nearly throwing Solomon from the saddle. "You will not take what's mine," Maxwell roared, advancing through the rain. "The child belongs to me." "She belongs to no one," Adeline shouted back, shielding Hannah with her body. Solomon steadied his wounded horse, raising the rifle. Maxwell's guns tracked to Adeline and Hannah, his intent clear in his cold blue eyes. Time slowed. Solomon saw Maxwell's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Adeline twist to shield Hannah with her own body, saw the future he'd glimpsed, a life with these two remarkable souls, threatening to vanish in an instant. He fired. The shot echoed across the camp, momentarily louder than the storm. Maxwell staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face. He looked down at the spreading crimson stain on his chest, then back up at Solomon. "Well played, Doctor," he managed, a ghastly smile twisting his scarred features. "But this isn't over." He collapsed to his knees, then fell face forward into the mud. Solomon had no time to verify whether the shot was fatal. Men were converging on them from all directions, momentarily stunned by their leader's fall, but quickly recovering. "Ride," he shouted to Adeline. "Northeast toward the river. I'll be right behind you." Adeline hesitated only a fraction of a second, then spurred her horse forward. Hannah clutched safely against her. Solomon followed, laying down suppressing fire until his rifle clicked empty. They crashed through the perimeter of the camp and into the darkness beyond, the storm concealing their escape as effectively as it had aided it. Behind them, shouts and random gunfire faded into the overwhelming sound of the wind and rain. They rode hard for hours, pushing the horses to their limits, stopping only when absolutely necessary to rest the animals. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving a washed, clean world glistening in the new light. They found themselves in a heavily wooded area far from Maxwell's camp, with no signs of pursuit. Only then did Solomon allow himself to examine his wounds. A bullet grazed on his shoulder and another that had torn through the flesh of his side without hitting anything vital. Adeline cleaned and bandaged them using supplies from his saddlebags that the guards had overlooked. "Will Maxwell come after us?" she asked as she worked, her hands gentle but efficient. Solomon winced as she tightened a bandage. "If he's alive, yes, but he'll be weakened, and his men may scatter without his immediate leadership. We have time." He looked at Hannah, who was collecting dewdrops from leaves nearby. She's remarkably resilient. Children often are, Adeline replied, following his gaze. But she'll need stability soon. A real home, not constant flight. Solomon nodded thoughtfully. I know a place, a small town in Colorado, far from here, remote enough to be safe, established enough to need a doctor. Adeline's hands stilled on his bandage. You want us to come with you? Yes, Solomon said simply. If you're willing, Hannah deserves a father who will love her as his own. And you, he reached up to touch her cheek gently. You deserve a partner who understands what you've endured, who will stand beside you whatever comes. Tears filled Adeline's eyes. Elizabeth chose me to be Hannah's mother, she whispered. Do you think she would approve of this too? Solomon smiled, though the pain was still fresh. Elizabeth always had excellent judgment about people. She would be grateful her daughter found her way to both of us. Hannah approached then, hands cupped around something. Look what I found, she exclaimed, opening her palms to reveal a tiny green tree frog. Can I keep him? Adeline laughed, the sound bright and unexpected in the aftermath of their ordeal. No, little one. He needs to stay in his home, with his family. Like us? Hannah asked, gently placing the frog back on a leaf. Are we going home now? Solomon and Adeline exchanged a look filled with newfound understanding. Yes, Solomon answered. We're going home, together. 3 months later, the sign above the modest clapboard building read simply, Solomon Pierce, M.D. Below, in smaller letters, General Medicine and Surgery. Inside, Solomon was concluding his examination of Mr. Jenkins's fractured wrist, setting the bone with practiced hands while explaining the procedure to an attentive Hannah. The 6-year-old stood on a stool beside him, her blue eyes serious behind small, wire-rimmed spectacles that matched Solomon's own, a gift he had presented to her after discovering her slight nearsightedness. Now, Hannah, what does Mr. Jenkins need to remember about caring for his cast? Solomon prompted. Hannah straightened importantly. Keep it dry, don't stick things inside to scratch, and come back if there's bad pain or swelling or funny smells. Mr. Jenkins chuckled despite his discomfort. Got a fine apprentice there, Doc. She's smarter than most grown folks I know. She certainly is, Solomon agreed with undisguised pride. The door opened as Adeline entered, carrying a basket of fresh herbs. The mountain air had brought color to her cheeks, and her dark hair, now grown longer, was braided simply down her back. How's our patient? She asked, setting down her basket and moving to inspect the cast. Complaining less than expected, Solomon replied with a smile. Hannah has been an excellent assistant. Mr. Jenkins eased himself off the examination table. How much do I owe you, Doc? $3 or equivalent in trade. No rush. The older man nodded gratefully. I'll bring by a quarter of venison when my boy gets back from his hunt. That fair? More than fair, fair, Solomon assured him. Just be careful with that wrist. No chopping wood for at least 6 weeks. After their patient had departed, Adeline began sorting her herbs on the small work table by the window. 3 months in their new home had established comfortable routines. Solomon's medical practice had quickly gained the trust of the small mining community, while Adeline's knowledge of herbal remedies complemented his more conventional approaches. Hannah moved between them, helping Adeline identify and bundle herbs with the same concentration she'd shown during Solomon's examination. The child had thrived in their new setting, her natural intelligence flourishing under their combined guidance. Sheriff Wilson stopped by while you were with Mr. Jenkins, Adeline mentioned casually. He had news from his contacts back east. Solomon paused in his cleaning of instruments. About Maxwell? She nodded, glancing at Hannah to ensure the child was absorbed in her task. No sign of him since that night. Most of his men disbanded. The Cherokee mission has been rebuilt, and Sister Marie sends her regards. That's good news, Solomon replied, though a shadow of concern remained in his eyes. The bullet he'd fired that night had struck Maxwell in the chest, but without confirmation of death, he couldn't be certain the threat was truly ended. Adeline seemed to read his thoughts. We're safe here, Solomon. We've made a good life. Yes, he agreed, his expression softening as he looked between her and Hannah. Better than I ever thought possible again. When the day's work was done, they walked together to their small house at the edge of town. It was a modest dwelling, but solid and warm, with a view of the mountains that turned spectacular at sunset. Hannah ran ahead, stopping to examine interesting rocks or plants along the path, while Solomon and Adeline followed hand in hand. "I've been thinking," Solomon said as they watched Hannah scrambling up a boulder to get a better view of a hawk circling overhead, "about us, about making this arrangement more permanent." Adeline looked up at him, her dark eyes serious. "Are you certain there would be talk?" "A white doctor and a half-Cherokee woman." "Let them talk," Solomon replied firmly. "I've spent too many years alone, Adeline. I don't want to waste another day without you properly by my side. Unless," he added with sudden uncertainty, "you don't wish it." Her answer was a smile that transformed her face, erasing the last traces of the hunted woman he'd found bleeding in his field. "I do wish it, very much." That evening, after Hannah was asleep, they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. Solomon took out his journal, a new one, the old having been filled and carefully stored away, and began to write. "What are you writing tonight?" Adeline asked, leaning against his shoulder. "The future," he replied. "For the first time in years, I find I can look forward rather than back." Inside the house, Hannah slept peacefully, the silver medallion resting on her bedside table. They had removed the map from inside, replacing it with a small portrait of the three of them that a traveling photographer had taken in town. The gold could stay hidden. They had found something far more valuable. As if reading his thoughts, Adeline said softly, "Do you ever wonder about the gold? Whether it's really there?" Solomon considered the question. "Sometimes, but Joshua was right. Its true value is in what it could build, not in the metal itself. Perhaps someday when Hannah is older, she can decide whether to seek it out. Use it for the school her father dreamed of." "Both her fathers," Adeline corrected gently. Solomon smiled, acknowledging the truth of her words. Through the strange workings of fate, he had been given a second chance at family. Not replacing what was lost, but building something new from the broken pieces of the past. "You know," he said after a comfortable silence, "in Hebrew tradition, names have great significance. Hannah means grace or favor." He looked toward the house where the child slept. "It suits her. She's been a grace to both of us." "And to Elizabeth," Adeline added softly. "Wherever she is now, I think she would be pleased with how her daughter has grown." Solomon nodded, emotion tightening his throat. The pain of learning Elizabeth's true fate would never fully disappear, but it had been transformed. From a wound that festered to a scar that reminded him of both loss and redemption. In the distance, coyotes called to one another across the valley, their voices rising and falling in ancient conversation. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and sage, so different from the grassy plains they had left behind. A new land, a new beginning. "Sunrise," Solomon murmured, remembering their escape signal and finding it appropriate for this moment as well, this dawning of a life he had never dared to hope for. Beside him, Adeline smiled in understanding. "Sunrise," she echoed, her hand finding his in the gathering darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The world remained unpredictable, even dangerous. But for tonight, under the vast Colorado sky, they had found their path to redemption. Together.